Yeah.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is James Walker, and I'm president of Watchman Fellowship, an evangelical Christian ministry focusing on interfaith evangelism. I'm also co-founder of this club, the Atheist and Christian Book Club, along with Bill Cluck. So I'm the kind of the Christian of the Atheist Christian Book Club. Bill Cluck's the atheist of the Atheist.
Yeah, real atheist, not an agnostic like Steve.
Oh, okay.
It's just halfway there.
Shots fired.
Boy, we haven't even started yet.
So we have a special guest we're going to be getting to in a little bit, and I'll introduce and all. But the Atheist and Christian Book Club, we're almost 3 years old now. We are a monthly gathering of both believers and skeptics and some others, respectfully. Remember that part, everyone. Respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. We typically will alternate. We do a Christian book one month, an atheist book the next month. We're going to have a special guest I'm going to introduce you to in a moment. But before we do that, I did want to give you some background and do some housekeeping on what's coming up next month. So at the beginning of the club, we try to announce what we're going to be doing next month and kind of pass this around. We're going to be talking about the book Atheist Overreach. Atheist Overreach is by Christian Smith. He's a professor of sociology at Notre Dame, and he has written the book. Especially, we're going to be focused on chapter 3. Again, as always, the whole book is fair game, but chapter 3 is going to be our focus chapter because it deals with tonight's topic, epistemology. We're coming from a Christian perspective. I think you're going to like this. I've read the introduction and 1.5 chapters of it so far, and it's a very short book, easy to read. But one thing you'll like about it, he is coming from a Christian perspective, but he says he's not trying to, in the book, prove atheism's true or not true or Christianity is true. He's just talking about how to think better, how we can, and he will argue, he's going to make the argument, that oftentimes atheists will overreach, that they will say things that can't be supported epistemologically. And so, but he'll also acknowledge Christians will do the same thing. No. And so, how can we think more clearly? He's going to be talking about that from obviously from a Christian perspective. We've already contacted Daniel Ray's contacted Dr. Smith, and he is going to be addressing the book club. And he's going to be taking your questions. A new way that we're doing that is if you go on our Facebook channel and if you want to just hold your phone up and ask the question, then when we're doing the interview with him ahead of time, he'll actually see you ask the question, and we'll put that together, and then we'll review that as we come in later for the for the book club. So that's what's coming up next month. Let me give you a little background on him. I've got a video that I'd like you to see as well on him before we get going with tonight's club. So Christian Smith attended Wheaton College. He received a BA from Gordon College. He's earned an MA and a Doctor of Philosophy from Harvard University. He's taught at Gordon College and then joined the faculty at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So our friend Bart Ehrman was one of his colleagues with him. And so he now teaches at Notre Dame, and he's the William R. Keenan Jr. Professor of Sociology. He's the director of the Center for the Study of Religions and Sociology of Society. And this is a little side note that I saw, but I thought, wow, being in a nonprofit and having to always be raising funds. He also has been awarded more than $20 million worth of research grants from Pew Charitable Trust, the Lilly Endowment Foundation, the John Templeton Foundation, and others as well. So we're going to get to meet him. He'll be taking your questions next month, and that's going to be February 7th. You also have something to put up on your refrigerator to help remind you about the club. So interestingly, we're going to also have an alternative if you don't have time to read the book. There's a 90-minute interview that was done by Michael Shermer about the book. Here's the book here. So Michael Shermer interviewed him for his podcast on Skeptic. And so we have a little 3-minute kind of get to know Dr. Smith as Michael Shermer interviews him. So that's going to be a video we're going to watch right now. We ready for that? This is Michael Shermer and
Yeah, in this book, I'm clear, and you just read one instance of it. I'm clear. I do not believe that if atheism is true, everything collapses into absolute nihilism and there's no reference for anything. I think you and I read some of your work, and you and I agree that the way things are, I'm not a Humean, facts and values must be radically separated. We agree the way reality is, the way human beings are, the way things operate causally gives us a lot of information to feed into reflection about how we want things to be or how things should be. So I wouldn't take that strong position that you just articulated some theists would take. But I do think, perhaps in reaction to that, I do think that there are claims that some atheists, and not all do, again, I'm not saying this is atheism, I'm saying these are a number of atheists I read, do overreach. They do want to claim more than I think is rationally justified. Like, why really is it every human being on earth is sort of, I should have an egalitarian and moral orientation toward and moral concern for. The second problem is what I call the problem of the shrewd opportunist. Socrates called this a Glaucon's challenge, and Hume called it the problem of the sensible knave, and that is, okay, let's suppose we have a moral system. It's not accountable to any divine being. We have laws and social pressures to sort of encourage everyone to go by it. The question is there, if somebody says, this is the shrewd opportunist position. Somebody says, oh, well, I want everyone else to always uphold the moral law that we've established. But under condition, and I normally will, but under conditions when I can do something that violates the moral law, it benefits me, and I know I can get away with it, or I'm quite confident. Why not? So normally, to follow what's morally right all the time, not to selectively free ride on the common good. So the question is, if there's a God, that you can answer, why shouldn't I do that? If we live in an atheist universe, it's not at all clear to me why the problem of the shrewd opportunist doesn't beset us all the time.
Well, thanks for letting Michael talk.
That'll give you a little taste of what, and you will get to hear him if you watch that, but that's a taste of what we'll be looking at next month. And again, an alternative, if you don't have time to read the book or even the focus chapter, watch that 90-minute interview with Michael Shermer, and I think you'll come here with a lot of ideas, a lot of questions, a lot of good things to talk about. So I want to say welcome. We have a special guest I'm going to be introducing to you, Steve McRae. I did want to find out real quickly, though, how many of you, again, we're checking for the Lamb's Book of Life just to see where we all are. How many of you are here and you identify as Christian? Would you raise your hand, Christian? I feel great. Wow. Okay, now we're going to need a couple of volunteers on the atheist side to join just temporarily with us to balance the scales a little bit.
Whoa. Good, Steve.
What has happened to our majority? I feel like
They fled into the outer regions.
They are
The only
in the face of superior firepower.
I guess it was that's what it is. But anyway, it's usually pretty close to even.
Yeah.
But anyway,
But our
yeah,
guests,
sometimes more Christians than atheists.
in honor of our guests, the choices aren't Christian and atheist.
That's
The
right.
choices are Christian, agnostic, and atheist.
Let me say-
You might get 3 different votes.
Let's do that. Let's do that. How many would self-identify as agnostic?
Whoa.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. How many would identify as atheist in the nicest sense of the word? I'm showing you how to raise your hand. That's not me.
Steve already has questions. We don't have questions. Steve has a question.
Okay. So how many we get on that roughly? Okay. Raise your hand again. Atheist. Okay. Great. And we have other or undecided. Raise your hand if you're other or undecided. I didn't mention Buddhism. Other.
He's got his own religion.
Other. Okay, we do have other. So, excellent. So,
No, he's looking for followers. Feel free to join.
Now, our special guest, that we're doing something a lot different this time, and let me say, first of all, thanks to my friend Jim Hall and Atheist Edge, because helping to put this together. Atheist Edge is a co-sponsor of our Atheist and Christian Book Club, as is the Maverick Skeptic is it Society? Yeah, out of the University of Arlington. And so we appreciate them, and of course our ministry, Watchman Fellowship, is also a co-sponsor of this. But help to get Steve here and to be able to join us in person. And Steve is the host of the Non-sequitur show, which is very popular YouTube channel, and also self-identifies as agnostic. And our topic that he's going to be talking to us about is agnostic epistemology. How do we know what we don't know? But before we get to that, I want a little bit more about Steve. I just found out tonight that, like me, we share this in common. Steve is a former Mormon. I'm an ex-Mormon as well. And so, could you take about 2.5 minutes? I'm going to do a 2.5 minute talk, remember those? And kind of give us your spiritual, all the important things that happened to you spiritually in 2.5 minutes, and kind of how did you get to where you are now?
Too long, didn't read version. Okay, and a book club, you didn't read. Yeah, basically, I never really was that spiritual growing up. My family was all over the place. My mom was Jewish, my dad was Protestant, my other family, my brother was Jehovah's Witness, we had Methodist, Pentecostal, the whole gambit. Never really was that spiritual. We would occasionally have prayer in front of a meal if we had like Thanksgiving. But I had a lot of Mormon friends, and then when I became 17, I took the missionary lessons, read the Book of Mormon, became Mormon. Fell away really quickly because I joined the military, and it's kind of hard to, for a new convert to be Mormon, and you would probably know to join the military, it doesn't really stick. And then later on in life, I just kind of more renounced it based upon some of the positions that the church was taking, the politics that I didn't agree with. And so I just completely fell away from the church, and then over time developed more the agnostic position. So I was never really, I was basically a non-theist, then a theist, and now back to non-theist again. But I was never an atheist.
Well, and
a philosophical way of looking at atheism, at least.
So you self-identify as agnostic now, but you never would put yourself fully in the atheist camp at any point of that. So
yeah, even growing up, generally speaking, I mean, I didn't really think about it consistently of what it was meant to be an atheist, but I never actually held the belief that there was no God. So I would never have self-identified as that position, nor would I have said, you know what, I believe there are no gods. And so even if you just miss the label outright and don't have to take it upon yourself, I never held the position that there were no gods. And so I was always at best, you know, I don't have a belief, or when I was a theist, I believe God existed, but I never got to the point where I said, I just believe there are no gods.
Well, I've searched around. I knew the name, but I didn't really know a whole lot about you. So I watched some of your video and tried to get to know a little bit about you. And when I interviewed you, I told you that you were controversial, but you already knew that.
I don't, but I do know that. I don't know why. It's not, the things I talk about shouldn't be that controversial.
Well, but you do agree you're controversial.
I have to accept that, I guess.
And so one of the things that I came across is you're the host of the Non-sequitur show, but apparently you've been banished from your own kingdom?
Yeah, I was kicked off my own show that I helped co-create.
Well, some of us know nothing about this, and others have followed it very closely, but could you kind of tell us the story of what the Non-sequitur show was about, what happened, and where are you as of right now?
Sure. So in 2017, a man named Kyle Curtis approached me to do a magazine. We started talking and kind of had a lot in common, and he wanted to start a podcast, and we decided on sequitur name, and we had a mission statement. We wanted to make sure that people have the ability to come and talk about what they want to talk about. We wanted to have controversial topics. We wanted to be outside the norm. We didn't want to talk about the most common things. We wanted something that people would be interested in hearing new and refreshing and they haven't been exposed to. I talked him into starting a YouTube channel because he wasn't wanting to go on YouTube. He didn't know much about it. And we started the YouTube channel. It took off. It became a very successful channel. It was valued at $100,000 just about before he decided to basically take the whole channel over. He kicked me and the producer off because I had given him primary control for specific reasons that I found later were kind of incorrect, why I shouldn't have given him control, but I did. I trusted him. I took it to court. I went to North Carolina Mandatory Business Court. I won. The judge has decided that I basically, he was found liable for fraud, conversion, unjust enrichment, breach of fiduciary duty, and breach of contract. Now he's signing an order for me to get the channel back. And so hopefully, once he does that, then he has 14 days to turn the channel back over to me. And we're gonna hopefully start over again. And kind of bring
But
it
you
back.
knew he was an atheist and they have no morals, so why would he trust him?
Should have known, right? You know? And he didn't accept objective morality at all. Yeah.
So what happens is, if he still refuses to give it over, at some point there'll be a court order for Facebook, I mean for YouTube itself to just give you the password.
Theoretically, we could actually have the YouTube do it, but I would rather have him found guilty of civil contempt of court and haul him for the judge. And explain it why. He
Yeah,
hasn't-
make him answer, to make him pay the piper, yeah.
And we're gonna, I promise we're gonna get to the meat, but this is kind of interesting to me. So does anybody have any questions about this whole, either his spiritual journey or what's happening with the YouTube channel?
I noticed you used the word "we" when you said starting back up. Who's we?
Me, Cheshire Vic, and producer Bullinator, who was
Which is the original
show.
producer,
Yeah.
right? Anyone else?
Just one thing to add, Non-Sequitur show was, for those of you who aren't aware, in the atheist community, it was on a fast track to be possibly the #1 atheist, like atheist experience, something very special. So we're hoping that once Steve gets the channel back, he can recover the damage and continue on the growth.
Yeah, he wanted to make it an atheist channel, and I balked at that. I was like, I promote critical thinking and not specifically ideological positions, and he wanted to be more of an ideological position. I go, that's counter to our mission
atheist
statement.
channel, I love you,
Right.
agnostics in
Yeah.
as well, so.
Non-believers.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, like, I love atheists, as you know that.
Thank you.
Shout out.
So you're not committed to theism or non-theism, but don't you have like a gut feeling as if you were a betting man, which one you'd fall on?
Good question.
I would probably, as of now, be on the lesser side, more toward atheism than theism. Marginally, but there's a range to be had there. It's not like you have to be 50-50.
But you're not a lost cause, is what I want to hear.
Oh, I believe open-mindedness is a virtue.
So open that your brains
You know,
fall
it's
out.
a virtue epistemology is like, hey, should
TJ!
Sure.
That's why it's not an
You
atheist.
can't change your position at least once if you're closed-minded and you're never going to grow. People have to be able to change their positions. You know?
Well, and you said you were impressed by the fine-tuning arguments that he knows Hugh Ross and.
Oh yeah, Hugh Ross.
Rad.
I know Hugh Ross. I'm going to be actually starting up. I got on the 8th. I got to be in LA. And Reasons to Believe wants to do a show with me with Fuzz Rana.
So what's the most compelling fine-tuning argument?
I don't think fine-tuning is that compelling of an argument per se. It's just that there's something to be said that if the natural units that we have, if they were any different, then of course life wouldn't exist. And so you also have the argument, well, it is the way it is because it could be no other way for us to exist and observe the universe, an anthropic principle. So I think they're not bad arguments, they're just not convincing arguments to say, if this is the case, ergo there must be a God.
Well, these numbers they throw out like 10 to the 70th, which is.
Yeah, but the problem with the numbers is what they do is they use a lot of post hoc analysis, and they use a lot of, the numbers that sound impressive, but when you break it down, they're not that much. Like, if I had a deck of cards, and I shuffle them, it's 52 factorial if I just laid them on the table and said, okay, the odds of this spread being like this is very high. It's 10 to 67 power, which is 52 factorial. That is unbelievably high number. Yet it happened. It literally it happened like that. So if you have enough iterations, you have enough universes. If there's like a multiverse, in one universe it has to be like this per se. But
Well, James' argument, which I think is a good argument, he says it's like hitting royal flushes 10 times in a row. Isn't that your argument?
You have a lot of variables, and it's like what you're dealing with is a life-permitting universe. You have to have so many of them this way. You know, you don't get in order to have the carbon-based life, you have to have carbon. You've got to have the periodic table. You've got to have everything exactly right at the TJ.
Doesn't that fall flat though when you consider a million monkeys with a million typewriters?
Well, you
with
can
the
postulate
astronomical-
a billion trillion universes.
Right, with the astronomical amount of time and opportunities for things to fall
We
into
only
place
have
the way
one
they
Big
have.
Bang, though.
well, there's something called normal in mathematics. You have a normal number, and
Right.
if so, like pi, they haven't discovered what pi is normal or not. And what that means is if
It's
the
not
entire work
rational.
of Shakespeare,
It's not
for
rational,
example,
right.
well, it's irrational, but they say, well, every number is enclosed in pi. You know, so you have, if you would encode like the works of Shakespeare, it's encoded in pi somehow. That would be only if it's a non-normal number.
But that's only because we haven't found the
And I don't
end of
think
pi
so.
yet.
Well, there is no end.
Theoretically, there isn't, yes.
Yeah, well,
We
not
haven't
theoretically,
found it.
there just cannot be. It's by definition an irrational number.
But haven't they stated, people have stated that if we
It's
ever
not
did,
terminating.
we ever did find it, not necessarily a termination, but where's someplace it starts to repeat, maybe.
Well, there's probably
we would say
You know what I'm
the
saying?
outworld.
Yeah,
People
I
have
think
said that if we
patterns, sure.
find that, we are that much closer to finding the gut. So, I mean, they're
Are
very
you looking
neat
for like a code in
like
pi?
they're saying, yeah, like that's the kinds of things I've heard.
Yeah.
I don't know how much weight there is to that, but I mean.
Well, what the focus on tonight, the topic is going to be going to be agnostic epistemology. How do we know what we don't know? So we're dealing with this idea of epistemology. You know, some of us have had courses in that as part of logic or philosophy or something. So, but then others you kind of hear it for the first time, and so this is what does epistemology mean? So we put together a little 3 minutes, Daniel?
I don't think it's that, 2 minutes.
2 minute explanation of what does epistemology mean. So let's watch that video.
Epistemology, an etymological adventure. From Britannica.com. Epistemology. The term is derived from the Greek episteme, knowledge, and logos, reason, and accordingly the field is sometimes referred to as the theory of knowledge. Greek, episteme, knowledge. Epistemi, to know. Acts 26:26. For the king knows about these matters, and I speak to him also with confidence, since I am persuaded that none of these things escape his notice, for this has not been done in a corner. Paul speaking to Festus in Caesarea. The root of epistemi and the root of episteme. Ephistemi, to set upon, set up, to stand upon, be present.
So now we have that resolved completely, right?
So Steve, they're already
I go
pulling.
home.
It's much easier
They're
just to
already
say,
pulling
"I've
the Greek
studied
card
it,
on
I
you."
know
Yeah,
what you know,
agreed.
how you know what you know.
Well, and how do you ground what you know? What's the difference? Well, let's do this. I did it in the interview, but let's just review. Give us a good working definition of epistemology.
Well, obviously it's the same knowledge, but I take epistemology as more personal. I think it is a lot more related to how you determine something to be just knowledge, or just like opinion versus justified belief versus knowledge. These are all different levels. And so by what means do you say, when I say I know this to be the case, what is that really entailing? What does it allow you to do? And how by means do you get there? What allows somebody to say, I know this, rather than something like I believe? Now, knowledge is a subset of belief, generally speaking. So if I believe something, I may not know it, but if I know it, I have to actually believe it. But what gets you from one level to another, and what's mere just opinion? So I think epistemology is more what is the science or the philosophy of separating these distinctions and saying, well, this person just has a justified belief, but they don't actually have knowledge. This person claims to have knowledge. Are they somebody who actually has knowledge? And that's what I personally think epistemology is what differentiates those categories.
Your show is the non-sequitur show.
Mhm.
Tell us what a non-sequitur is.
Well, a non-sequitur is a formal logical fallacy that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises.
Which can sometimes be the same thing that we're dealing with epistemology. Sometimes we say we have knowledge about things that we don't have, where it's not properly grounded. What we mean is we're confident in it, not that we have reasons to believe.
Yeah, well, you were Mormon, so like in Mormon, you have testimony meetings, and you'll stand up there and say, well, I know that God exists. Well, as a kid, you don't really think to yourself, what am I saying when I say that I know that God exists? Because looking back, I didn't have that knowledge. It was not, and knowledge cannot be false. Knowledge can only be true. So there's no such thing as a false knowledge. You can have false beliefs. I can believe something that is wrong, right? But if I have knowledge that's incorrect, you would just say that my knowledge, I was mistaken about having knowledge. I call it, and I blatantly took this from a friend of mine, Ozzy, but it's the principle of attribution and retraction. And so you attribute something like I have knowledge, but then you take back that claim that I never had knowledge to begin with. But beliefs are not like that. Beliefs can be false. If I say that I believe it's going to rain tomorrow, and tomorrow comes along and I was wrong, I just had a false belief. I don't say that I didn't have the belief, because I still had the belief, but it was wrong. It was a false belief.
So it'd be more proper to say, instead of I knew that and now I know that that's not true, is to say I thought I knew that.
I thought I had knowledge, but I didn't have.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But you can even believe something that's true and not have true knowledge, because let's say, for example, if you believe that echinacea caused you to be cured of a cold, and there hadn't been any scientific studies that had been done to prove that. Well, you might have believed that, but there was nothing to back you up. And eventually, there might have been some study that showed that echinacea does in fact cure the common cold. And so now you have true knowledge. I'm not saying that that's...
Well, you could have anecdotal evidence. Like, for example, if I pick an echinacea and I do it multiple times, and every time I've gotten better, I would have a justified belief. I would be justified to hold that belief, whether it has scientific evidence for it or not, whether it's actually a case study to show it to be the case. I'm still justified because I have reasons to think that's the case. And there's pragmatic reasons, also prudential reasons. If I think to myself, it's better for me to believe something like a medicine if I get better because I have a family support and I need that to help me get through whatever sickness I'm having, there's prudential reasons for that. That also could be a reason why you are justified to hold a belief.
Is anecdotal evidence a type of evidence? I mean, could that be
Yes,
sufficient evidence?
I think there's two ways that the word evidence is kind of, I think, used and abused. Evidence in science is generally what changes the likelihood of a hypothesis to be the case or less likely the case. So what switches between one explanation and another. But generally speaking, to me, when you're in a discussion, evidence is what's being submitted for evaluation. So when people say, well, like, the Bible's not evidence, the Bible's the claim, well, no, if I say I believe in God, here's the Bible, they're submitting that as evidence for you to evaluate. You can reject it and say, well, I don't really think that's great evidence, and you have your reasons against it. But I think people that say that, well, evidence has to be something empirical, or has to be measured, has to be scientific, that's not necessarily the case, because if I'm just saying, this is the reasons why I'm justified to believe God exists, here's the Bible, then I think somebody could be justified for it. Then you attack the reasonings for it. You say, well,
So-
what is it about the Bible you agree with, and let's talk about that.
So Steve, you've heard of Alvin Plantinga's.
Yeah.
He believes that there's these properly basic beliefs, like the color purple, or whatever, or well,
A properly basic belief is something that it has to be ubiquitous to everybody. They have to, for example, accept it in order to function.
and he says Christianity is a properly basic belief.
I
What do you think
disagree.
of that?
He has Reformed epistemology, and I disagree with him on that, because you don't have to have God to function. No offense to it, but it's not something that's ubiquitous to all people.
Coffee, yes. No.
Coffee, yes, this properly basic belief. But for example, the acceptance of reality would be something that's common. When you get up in the morning, you put your feet on the floor, you accept the fact that the floor has to exist, or else you wouldn't be able to get out of bed. So properly basic belief would be reality is real.
So don't you think he has some nerve saying that Christianity is a properly basic belief?
From his point of view, if you want to have a Reformed epistemology, he could do that. I mean, he's arguing a position. And so if he accepts it and he puts that as a properly basic belief, I don't have a problem with him doing that. I don't have to accept it as a properly
But a defeater would be a Muslim could have a properly basic belief.
Yes.
Or a friggin' Mormon. By the way, if you've ever gone to a Mormon meeting, it is the most boring thing. And you two would
Well,
agree
they're
with us.
3 hours long, yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, they've cut it to
Well,
2, but it's like, it is
And
torture.
I think it's 2 hours long.
I tend to foundationalism. Okay. And
What-
foundationalism, okay, so foundationalism is the point where you have these properly basic beliefs that you start off with, and then you build justificatory conditions and beliefs from them.
Right.
Rather than have a coherentism approach where you have different beliefs that you can choose and change on the fly. Once you have-
Jim's got a question.
Yeah.
I'd like
So
to.
as far as Christianity being claimed to be a properly basic belief, it seems to me that you are missing some causal links in between what would be the end of an infinite regress and where you would be able to justify that it was your particular intelligent agent deity that created.
Well, it's an assumption.
Right.
Right.
But what I'm saying is that there's a gap there, and there's a couple of unjustified steps that are made because they lack those causal links.
Yeah, well, I'm not a big fan of Reformed epistemology, obviously, but infinitism or the infinite regress, I don't have a problem with, because there's nothing logically absurd about a logical
Right.
infinite
It's
regress.
just when you draw a line.
It's epistemically difficult to understand infinite regress. I mean, our minds are not set for the
Infinity.
infinity. Right.
It's impossible by
But
itself.
there's only so many options available for an explanation for, like, the universe, right? You have an infinite causal regress, or you have a brute fact, a contingent brute fact, which would be more foundationalism, or you have some kind of metaphysical necessity. He's arguing that God is that metaphysical necessity, which they're allowed to do. I just don't see how it gets you to a God. You can argue one of those 3 trilemma things, but if there's some kind of metaphysical necessity, I've never heard a good argument why that metaphysical necessity must be some kind of deity.
So what are your foundational beliefs? What are your properly basic beliefs? Where do you start from?
I think that, well, obviously reality exists.
Oh, that's a good start.
We can observe the universe.
Okay.
And we can draw inference from it.
Yeah, Dan would agree with that.
I think those are the
I think
very
he has a
foundational.
Go ahead, Dan. And then Eric. Yeah.
So a couple of questions. Just first, do you believe that just from what you said, I would assume that you would assume. Do you believe that belief precedes knowledge? That's first
Yeah.
part.
Okay. There are different theories of knowledge, but the most common are belief first. That in order to have knowledge, you have to meet certain criteria. The simplest one people generally use it's basically called justified true belief.
Right. So something precedes knowledge for you.
Yeah, you believe it, and then if it's true and you're justified, you can claim that as knowledge. There are obviously problems with JTP. Anybody who's looked into JTP knows the get-error problems. They do exist, and there have been papers out there that have stated that any belief first is going to have some kind of get-error problem. It's due to what's called epistemic luck. But I do think it makes more sense to say, if I know something, I actually believe it. Because it's hard to say I know something, but I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Right? It's epistemically unsound to me. Now, there are theories out there that could be like that. I just don't subscribe to them.
In one of Michael Shermer's books, he says beliefs come first, then we sort out facts. We look for facts to confirm our beliefs. We're not good at evaluating evidence.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't like the fact that since knowledge incorporates belief, they think that belief is just faith-based or kind of thing, right? So they say, well, if I know it, then I don't believe it. But that makes no sense.
So with the three items you presented for the universe, so you had a metaphysical necessity, you had brute fact,
contingent,
and then you had a infinite regress. Do you find that between a relationship between an infinite regress and an eternal being, that there's an infinity and an eternity?
Well, you know what? I'm going to give a little credit to the Christians on this. Ooh. Don't hate me. But there's something called the principle of sufficient reason. And the first two of those arguments, the infinite regress and the brute fact, don't satisfy PSR. Now, I'm not a big fan of PSR. I don't really fully accept it. But at least the metaphysical necessity does satisfy the PSR to some degree. The problem is if you posit...
What is PSR?
Principle of sufficient reason.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But the problem with then is if you posit a God for that, then you have to go, well, does God really explain this? Because if God created this world, okay, it is either he created it by just arbitrariness, he just said, you know what, this is the way I want it to be, but no particular reason, which means he's kind of capricious, or he created it because this was the best of all possible worlds. And if this was the best of all possible worlds, what made it the best of all possible worlds?
Or he created it for his glory, which is something that we are all sort of in the dark about.
But does that actually explain anything?
Well, and that's okay. So when you talk about a sufficient explanation, and you're talking about epistemology, who's determining the satisfaction of whether or not an explanation is satisfactory? How does that?
Well, because an infinite regress, I don't think anybody would really argue that explains anything. It's not an explanation. Yeah. It has no explanatory. It's no explanatory power whatsoever.
For God specifically, who determines whether or not a God would be? What kind of answer about God would be satisfactory?
Well, that's what each person would have to argue as the Christian or as the Muslim or whoever's positing that deity. That's why I think positing of a deity, you can do that. But it doesn't even, to me, satisfy PSR because saying God did it is still not, to me, a causal or mechanistic explanation for anything.
So, Eric, you had a question?
I think Steve had a question.
I think Eric had a question.
He was next. Go ahead, Eric.
I was curious to where you got your definition of properly basic, because it seems that your definition seems more pragmatic, whereas Plantinga would say a properly basic belief is a belief that is not based on a prior justification of belief.
And there's 5 things that go into properly basic belief that I hear too. I don't have them memorized at the moment, but he would be right on that. Generally speaking, that a properly basic belief is something that is not contingent, that's not inferred or dosastically inferred from prior beliefs. So yes, he is correct on that. So we're just looking at things a little differently. But Plantinga's definition, I'm fine with, because all properly basic beliefs are not contingent or inferentially derived from other beliefs.
Because yours was tend to be more pragmatic, like
mine goes my pragmatic, but they're not at odds with each other. Yeah.
Okay.
Because one's overall explanation, explanation of what a properly basic belief is, but what qualifies as a properly basic belief, mine would be the more pragmatic. Like I said, I've got those other people. Yeah. So
are you going to be giving a presentation where you hash out the agnostic epistemology?
Eventually, we're trying to get through it, yeah.
Let's do this first, though,
That's right, yeah.
and that's good.
Who had the next question?
With just a second, though, Jim has something for us, and then we're gonna go
I've
to
been
Steve.
monitoring,
This
I
is-
always monitor live chat.
So this is from our Facebook Live audience.
Three things. The third one we can table, since it's all very lighthearted, because it's more drama and controversy.
Okay.
So if you want to put that one on the shelf, we could address it now or later.
We'll hold
whatever.
that.
Okay. So we just, well, one's just a comment. Congratulations, we just broke the live chat record forever for the history of this club.
Wow.
No, thanks to Steve, thanks Steve.
Second, the only other non-controversial one is Sweet Heathen is also prolific on YouTube, and so.
We got celebrities all over.
Jim Major.
Real quickly, what's
and
the
you got
name
a
of
fan that
Jim?
just said you look gorgeous, and the other one is
Thank
No,
you.
I want to know Jim's channel. What's the name of it?
Jim Majors. He
Jim
used to
Majors.
be disciple of Kairos. Now it's just Jim Majors.
Jim Majors on Jim Majors' channel.
I know,
Yeah.
contrary to
And
personal
he's-
belief, she does exist. I
He's
mean,
way more intelligent and a lot
That's
better
fake.
than I am.
She's actually fuzzy.
I know, she's kind of nice, right?
And now Steve also had a question for us, I think.
Yeah, maybe want to
Comment.
simplify the idea of properly basic beliefs. It's from externalism, so it's the basic premise is that you can take it from as far, it's not with Reformed epistemology, you can take it back to the 1800s with C.S. Peirce, up to Goldman, people that are involved in entitlement theory and things like that, where the essential thing that they're saying is that we are geared naturally to make proper, appropriate inferences. And so those automatically, whatever, there's no sense in saying that a default position is to be pro something or against something. Whatever comes to mind that we believe has come to mind because it was caused. And because of that, and the kind of thinker that we are, we're automatically warranted and justified to believe whatever comes to mind.
Self-justificatory.
Pretty much all of evolutionary psychology says that's wrong because we're pattern seekers and our ancestors that were living in the bush back in the day, they didn't have very many properly formed beliefs about how reality actually worked. What actually,
mechanism.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were lizard brain mechanisms, and where our psychology.
Well, that goes
on
back to what Eric, though, I mean, the
Yeah.
pragmatic reason is we
Well,
have to
exactly.
accept certain, if your
Well,
foundation.
we're looking
you
for
have to accept
patterns
certain
because
beliefs.
we're trying to avoid the predator that is rustling in the bushes. It might not be a predator, but the best of our ancestors were the ones who believed it was no matter what, even if that was
You're-
wrong.
you're
So
talking
we're
about
geared
useful
exact-
false beliefs.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
there are arguments to be had that even
Just
some false
back
beliefs
up a
can be
little bit because
useful.
you flew past that. Explain a little bit about beneficial false beliefs.
Like he was saying, I mean, it's a false belief that the rustling was not a predator, but over time that could actually develop
Right.
to be a self-preservation
That's,
mechanism.
and that's why I think
There are-
it's
I think
based
we all
on-
have some false beliefs.
Wrong
that are
ideas
useful.
can help you survive.
Yes.
Evolutionary argument against naturalism.
Yeah, I was gonna just say that, Steve. What do you think of the evolutionary argument against naturalism, which is like, if we're evolved and we're just getting this stuff on the fly, how can we trust our brains if they're so, randomly?
They're not random. Everything is a response to stimuli.
Well, whatever. I mean, but it's not a. It's just.
You're not
it's
like
not.
my answer, but I don't think we ever see reality for what it is. We are biological creatures, and so we have a filter that we cannot look past. So whatever naive realism is, whatever the base reality is, we have our own filters that we cannot look past it. We cannot see the terrain, what we see is a map. So when I'm looking at something, my map's gonna be different from your map, from everybody else's map. When I say, this is a cup in front of me, my brain's telling me there's a cup. How you're visualizing it, your map is different. What the actual terrain is, we can't say. That is something that I believe is very much outside our epistemic limits.
Okay, let's say this. I think we could do about 3 or 4 clubs in a row just on what we're talking about
yeah,
now.
seriously.
But we are trying to head toward, one day, this promised land called agnostic epistemology. How do we know what we don't know? And so I think what will help us, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, but maybe to really get our handle on epistemology as it relates to things we don't know, how do we know what we know, is to get this great philosopher Donald Rumsfeld from the Bush administration, who's going to talk about epistemology and what we don't know. You ready? Let's watch this video.
There are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. Excuse me, but is this an unknown unknown? I'm not
several unknowns, and I'm just
I'm not going. I'm not going to say which it is.
He's not wrong.
Yeah, no, actually, so
He's not wrong.
He started off like that.
You
What
can't
he was
argue
saying, I was
with
like,
it.
he's actually making a point here.
There
but,
was no
yeah,
argument on
okay.
that.
Well,
There are things we know we don't know.
People laughed at that, but he's absolutely
He's
right.
right. He's got a point. Sure, I'm not going to disagree with that.
So let's do this. You're an agnostic, and we talked about this a little bit in the interview, but agnostic can be used several ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes agnostic can have the concept of that you are somewhat skeptical about all knowledge. Can we trust anything that we know? But most people use it, and I think you do, in a more narrow sense of can we know about, does God exist? And even that can be subdivided further by if I say I'm agnostic about the existence of God, am I saying I'm agnostic because I personally don't know, or am I saying it's impossible for anyone to know the answer to that question? Am I that type of agnostic? So let's talk a little about that. What is agnosticism? What type of agnostic are
Okay,
you?
so I think it helps to differentiate agnosticism from skepticism. Because skepticism is more, do we have knowledge? Do we have the ability to have knowledge? So not this ordinary doubt. A lot of people use the word skeptic to mean I just have ordinary doubt. But actual skepticism, whether you have a Pyrrhonian school of skepticism or academic skepticism, is can we even have knowledge? A Pyrrhonian skeptic would be somebody who says, I don't even know if we can even have knowledge. But an academic skeptic would say, we can't have knowledge. Knowledge is something that is unobtainable. And there's reasons for that, but that's skepticism. Agnosticism started off as a normative epistemic principle. It was basically a methodological approach. It's very similar to a science's approach. It was a little more logical positivism, which is how you base truths on propositions. But that's how Huxley kind of came up with the term. He wanted a position that was explaining his own view of things. He felt that he didn't really have a name for his position. Over time, though, that has changed in philosophy. It has become more of either what's called a epistemological proposition, which is the knowability of God. Is the knowledge of God possible, right? That would be the propositional aspect of agnosticism. But that's not how the word is normatively used in common parlance. I mean, in philosophy, I should say. It's not how, when you say agnostic, what you're saying is that I do not have a position on the proposition. I've suspended judgment on it. So let's say the proposition is God exists. The theist would affirm that. The theist says, I believe the proposition is true. They hold the position that God exists. Contrary to that, the atheist would say, again, philosophically speaking, that no, that is wrong. The proposition is false. God does not exist. So one has a belief that God exists. One has a belief that God does not exist. But the agnostic says, I don't have a belief either way. I do not believe that God exists. I do not believe that God does not exist. I suspend judgment on the proposition, usually waiting for more reasons to have a justificatory position. Because if an agnostic says, I don't have a position either way, they're not feeling comfortable enough to say, I'm justified to say, I believe there's God. I'm not justified to say that God does not exist. But I have to be justified to why I hold the agnostic's position. Even agnostics have justificatory conditions. Why are you suspending judgment? So whatever position you have, whether it's a belief God exists, God does not exist, do not believe, any position you take with respect to that proposition, I maintain there is a burden of justification, which is also known as the burden of proof, which is a misnomer. But people say, well, it has to do with onus probandi. It literally means proof. Well, no, because that's how it was derived from an etymological point of view. But the Big Bang, it wasn't a bang, right? The Big Bang is what we call it, but we all know that wasn't a bang. For the same principle, the burden of proof, the burden of justification is why do you have particular reasons to hold to a position with respect to...
Speaking of the burden of proof, what do you think of the Christians' criticism of atheists that say, I don't have to make a claim, I don't have to show any evidence, because you have to make the burden of proof.
Yeah, I think
do we as atheists, or do we have to make a case for our non-belief?
It depends on, if you want to have a justified non-belief, then yes, you have to make a case for it to yourself, not to somebody else. If I want to convince somebody, if I say, like George, if I say, I do not believe God exists, and you say, well, why? And I say, well, let me give you reasons why, and I'm having a conversation to try to explain to you, then I have a little bit of a responsibility there. I'm not going to use the word onus, someone back there knows what I'm talking about, but then I have a responsibility to kind of justify it to the person if I want to convince them.
And perpetuity?
It's a burden of persuasion is what it is.
Yeah.
Right? I'm trying to persuade them.
Can you differentiate real quick the difference between a response to a true dichotomy and what's a second order belief?
Yeah. So
Well, everybody knows that. Come on.
yeah. Well, okay. So well, there's two different things. So dichotomy is basically true or not true, right?
Belief or
But
non-belief.
if I have a first order belief, that means I have what's called an epistemic disposition toward a proposition. If I believe something to be the case, I have a, for lack of a better way of explaining it, I have a position on it. I hate the word to say I believe that I have a belief, but I have a disposition toward it. Okay, we're going to call that belief. But if I suspend judgment on it, it's not a first order belief. It is a second order belief. So agnosticism is a belief about a belief, which makes it a second order belief because it's not directly relating to the proposition.
But there's still a burden of proof for that.
There's still a burden of justification we have. But why is it you suspend judgment on it? Why can't you formulate it?
It's still linked to that dichotomy. It's still linked to non-belief. but
Belief
it's
and
a-
non-belief are
it's a
dichotomous.
It's a subset.
But belief that is true and belief that is false are not dichotomous.
Right.
Because I can hold a
Right.
belief either way, therefore it cannot be a dichotomy. Yeah. Which I think a lot of people get confused on because they've been so ingrained to think that, yes, it is a true that you have a belief or you do not believe. But in philosophy, atheism is not merely not believing. It is the belief that the proposition of God existing is false. That makes belief that is true and belief that is false not an actual dichotomy. And I think a lot of people are confused on that because they think that, well, you can't have agnosticism because you either believe or you don't believe. Well, all agnostics don't believe. All agnostics are non-believers because they've suspended judgments. At the same point, if I said the proposition God does not exist, I don't have a position on it either. So agnostic is just as much like a weak atheist as it would be a weak theist. They have no position either way on either of those propositions, whether the proposition of theism or the proposition of atheism.
I hear a lot of the a weak atheist. I've heard that, but I've never heard agnostics being accused of being weak theists. You're saying it's really two sides of the coin.
It's the same thing because the way it's commonly understood is that atheism is framed in terms of theism. Okay, so if the proposition is God exists, the atheist would reject that, disbelieve it, or deny it, which all is understood to be, I believe the negation. It's not, if I reject you for a job, I don't believe you, they call it rejection, but in actual rejectionism, that is the affirmation of the negation. So if I say I deny P, or I believe P is false, or if I disbelieve P, which P stands for proposition, that's saying I believe that the proposition is actually false.
So you can't say, someone tells you, hey, I got $1 million buried in my backyard. You can't say, I don't believe you without you calling them a liar?
You don't have to call them a liar.
That's what I'm saying.
If I say I don't believe you, I'm not saying
the
that's
negation
false.
is saying what they're saying is
No.
false.
Say I don't. Well, hang on.
If you don't believe somebody, you necessarily don't believe it.
If I say I don't believe you, I'm not saying that you're false. I'm just saying I don't have a position.
Exactly.
I don't have to believe that you're
We're just caught up on the words being used to describe those positions is what it boils down to.
But what he was saying before, if the proposition was in the atheist framing, if I say the proposition is there are no gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
The theist is going to reject that, right? They're going to say, well, that's false. There is a God, right? So, but the weak theist would say, well, I don't have that belief that that's true, but I'm not going to say that it's false.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what the atheist is doing when they say, well, if you say that you don't believe, if you don't affirm that proposition that God exists is the case, you're automatically an atheist. Well, clearly not, because what they're doing is saying, well, you're just not affirming it, ergo, you're an atheist. Well, then there's special pleading if they don't allow the theist to do the same thing. The theist can say, well, you're not affirming the proposition of atheism, that there are no gods,
right.
Ergo, you're a theist.
What about the case where you're just like, look, I don't believe gods exist, but I'm also not saying that your God doesn't exist. And what do you call the people that are like, look, I'm only accepting the negation of the proposition of your specific described God.
You can have local atheism.
Right, that's my position is like,
There's
look,
a lot of gods I believe that don't exist.
Like,
I can be agnostic and say, hey, Bala doesn't exist, I believe Thor doesn't
specific
exist.
one that's described, I reject, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You're an atheist about all the gods that you're familiar with.
Right, exactly. I don't know about
the global atheist is there are no gods.
Right.
There are none. Doesn't matter which one you pick. But you can have local atheists. Like I'm a local atheist for Thor.
I'm definitely 100% certain on it.
No offense to polytheists.
Let's do this. Again, those who are watching on Facebook, we are monitoring the comments, and if you say something real witty, we will read that and comment on it. So if you have a question, we will try to get to you. So Jim, you have one right now?
We have time. That's always fast, isn't it?
That's wrong. Yeah.
Oh, it's cool. All right, so this was several months ago. You probably updated it since then, but I'd like to familiarize people
Yeah,
with
I
your
modified that a
flow
little
chart.
bit because,
All right,
it
so
should've-
here's a flow
yeah.
chart, and I can send it out to you guys, or I can post it on the site later, but is it basically still
Yeah,
good?
there's only one part that I would like to
Okay.
change, because I should be more like a Dostoevsky nihilist approach.
So let's wait till he
Okay.
updates it, but here's what we're gonna do. If you go to our Facebook page, Friends of the Atheist Christian Book Club, that will be posted up there later in the
It leads you down to
inerrant
what,
position.
based philosophically, what your label should be.
Yeah, I think the
I
flow
find
chart
it
is pretty
very
sound,
useful.
except for like one part, I should have put it as Dostoevstic nihilism, which is the position that there are no beliefs.
How can you make that mistake?
I know, what was I thinking?
It says
There are people out there, there's people out there that for some reason they have an aversion to the word belief, right?
It says I ought to be calling myself an evidentialist agnostic right now instead of an atheist.
Whoa, we made progress.
Yes.
Congratulations.
You're making progress.
Evidentialism, I don't think really bears out.
How many would self-describe themselves as fundamentalist atheists?
I'm an anti-fundamentalist atheist. Ask these
You know,
guys.
somebody asked, how many of you hold the belief that there are no gods? Like, gods do not exist. You maintain the position there are no gods. Yeah, see?
There's not that many.
And how many that you do, you think you can justify that? Which, by the way, I think people can easily justify that. I think it's not even difficult to do. But do you think you're justified to say it? The whole position.
Are you asking for me to give you evidence?
No,
that
not
will
evidence.
Convince all?
No.
They
Not here now,
everybody thinks they are
to
justified. No,
yourself.
not everybody knows why
Right.
they are.
Do you have reasons why you hold that position?
I think everybody thinks they're justified in their beliefs.
You know what? I disagree. I think that there are some
Simple
people that
logic
probably know
and
they
the
have
science
beliefs that
around us.
they don't. care
Maybe
if
they
they're
just don't
justified.
hold to
Not
them.
only that, I think an agnostic is just a wuss. He's just checking.
That's what I was telling him. Hey, Tillerson, you had something to
Try
say.
being one.
Yeah, on your flow chart, you said you got something wrong.
Well, not wrong. I should have labeled
Yeah.
it differently.
I don't believe you got anything wrong.
But you're a fundamentalist atheist?
You rather you see the flow chart?
No, I don't believe you got anything wrong. That's my belief.
Okay.
By the way, I wanted to bring up
Fact.
Eric Fernandez and the great Aaron Ra, who's been here in person.
Oh yeah, and I'm humbled to be here. I'm in great company.
They had this discussion at.
I watched Eric. I'm a big fan of Eric.
He's a
actually.
great video. But he had a discussion at the Bible and Beer, and what the discussion was basically, Christians say they have faith. And what atheists say, like Peter Balkosian, who wrote a manual, says it's pretending to believe something that you know isn't true.
Mark Twain.
Yeah,
That there's no evidence.
Okay.
And go ahead.
I watched Eric's discussion. Like I said, I'm a fan of Eric, and even though we don't agree, obviously, I mean we have fundamental disagreements, but I like your approach. But words are polysemous, and like
Yes.
and so I do believe, like for example, we have faith-based commitments, and I know that sounds really odd. What do you mean by faith-based commitments? These are things we accept because, like again, reality is real. I have to accept reality is real. Or even for example, the problem of Hume's problem of induction, right? How do you justify induction? You cannot use induction to justify induction. It's circular.
Use abduction.
So I have to take induction to something that works daily on the uniformity of nature, that it must be the case tomorrow as it is today, or else I can't really function it, because I can no longer draw inferences, right? So that to me is a faith-based claim, because I have no justification to use induction.
But you have to operate in reality, though.
But hang on. But the word, like the faith-based, the way the Christians use it, they use it in a different means. Yeah, that's absolutely fine to do that, as long as somebody's understanding how somebody's using that word. And so when I say I have a faith-based commitment, Eric's going to understand what I mean. When he uses the word faith, I know what he means by it. I don't see a problem. But when I watched Eric and Aaron, they were butting heads because Aaron didn't want to understand the way he was using the term, which was nothing. That's the most common use of the term.
And what I feel like screaming this, Aaron just could not get it through his head that Christianity has evidences, like you believe, or a historicist. He was crucified most likely. That the church started in Jerusalem, which could be easily falsified. That the disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe Jesus rose from the dead, despite every evidence to the contrary. So, I mean, wouldn't you agree with that, Eric, that there are some, evidences for your belief, and that's what don't you agree? That's what atheists.
Yeah, look.
That's what next month we're gonna on the overreaching book. These are the things that are gonna be discussed.
And that's the thing. My criticism is that Christians think they have a slam dunk, that they're overreaching. Would you agree?
Well, there is overreaching on both sides.
There's like the 5 fundamental things of Christianity that people kind of say, these are the things that we accept. Oh, it's true. And even those I think are questionable.
Right.
But I think the mythicist approach is completely flawed. I like Carey as a friend. I think he's
right.
But I think his mythological approach is skewed from bias.
That's a very nice word.
Everything you can possibly find on the topic would reject mysticism. Yeah, so, I mean, I think a lot of people want mythicism.
So you're going to give a little ground, say the Christians do have some foundational faith.
Well, yeah, well, they have the reasons, right? And there's nothing wrong with presenting reasons why you believe your justification, and then attack those justifications. You can attack people's reasons for that. That's great. But to say there's like no evidence, what I think what Aaron does, and no disrespect to Aaron, because
Oh, please. Oh,
I
we don't have that.
like Aaron. I really honestly like Aaron. But I think he makes this mistake is he puts everything from a scientific perspective. And that actually, I hate to use this word because it's going to trigger people, but that actually is scientism.
Amen.
Yeah, so,
Ooh.
I mean, it really actually
Well,
is.
don't give up too much ground.
The misuse of scientific methodological reasoning for certain things, like even with epistemology, is misuse.
Yes, what he doesn't understand, there's scientific evidence, but when we study history, there's historical standards how we evaluate, like the criteria of embarrassment.
Yeah,
You know, it's
the various
embarrassing.
criteria, I'm not a big fan of the criteria for embarrassment, but I at least understand why they use it, and it's something that can be discussed, right?
Yeah,
I don't like people dismissing things by fiat.
Multiple attestation.
Yeah.
Which is, if it's, attested by several people, authors in an independent manner, then it leads you to maybe this is true.
I think there's reasons why, if there's all these attestations, if all these people say, well, this is one story, this is one story, there probably was a kernel behind that.
Exactly.
I think it'd be really hard to say that there's just absolutely nothing to it, but like most stories, they start with a kernel,
It's a grain of sand.
and then they just build around that, right?
Right.
So I think it doesn't make much sense to me to throw the baby out the bathwater.
But they're not gonna get anyway with-
nobody named Jesus or all
No,
of this,
yeah.
absolutely nothing. Especially when it's based on Beasley.
But they're not going to get anywhere with you, Eric, if they just think you believe pure, a lark, right?
Yeah, and I think it goes to both sides. Like you said, you want to take a person's position and attack their justification, not a straw man, because if you believe X because of Y, then let's address Y and not touch A, B, and C, which you didn't even bring up. So you address the person's specific reason for why they say they feel justified for specific belief, and I think that's how productive discussion is.
Yeah, but not to toot our own horns or anything, but that's one of the things I enjoy about, not that we're perfect, but I enjoy about this club, that there's a lot of steel manning and not straw manning, really an attempt to stop and understand what the person you don't agree with is saying and how they got there, and addressing that rather than just throwing up shooting down an argument they're not even making.
Yeah, I think the best way to approach something is steel man, because if you wanted to argue with somebody and you're just going to take the weakest position they have, what are you demonstrating? What are you showing to them? You're not giving them any reason to change their position. But if you take their strongest case and you're able to show them why they're mistaken on it, then their thoughts will change.
It's about time for a break, but before we have from our Facebook audience a question or comment.
Jason Ellis. I can't control who comes on the.
I don't know who he is.
I can't control. Oh, really? Okay.
Okay. Sorry, Jason.
All right.
Jason.
Yes, please ask.
Listen up.
If he were to say, I believe the Rams might win the Super Bowl, are you claiming it is so? If the answer is no, but he's predicting you will say yes.
Okay, if I say that I believe the Rams might, that's a true statement, because they might win. I hold the belief.
You don't know the difference between B and K, whatever that means.
A P is predicate,
okay.
and K would be, for K would be knowledge, right? KP
Okay.
would be I know P. But if I say I believe the Rams might win, well, that's true. If they're playing
You're
tomorrow,
hedging, though,
well, no, it's not even hedging. There is things like might, so it is hedging. But I do hold that belief because it is a possibility they may.
But are you
But let's say that.
Is it
they're-
just
but hang
basically-
on, but hang on. Let's say they're not playing them, whatever, like on Sunday. Let's say it's the Packers and and like I don't know, Tampa Bay or something, whatever. But then if I say, well, I believe the Rams are going to win, well, they're not even playing.
Yeah.
I mean, that'd be a nonsensical belief to have.
It'd be
But
nonsense,
I
yeah.
still can hold that belief, though. I can literally hold that belief, even though it's wrong. We know it's
Oh,
false.
I've done that all the time, saying, yeah,
But
the
beliefs are
stadium
like
falls
that.
and
You
they
have
go
false
through.
beliefs.
A lot of us are Cowboy fans. We know exactly what you're talking about.
I can hold.
We have no belief.
I can hold the position that, hey, it's raining outside, but I don't believe that's rain. This thing called Moore's paradox, where you can actually not have a belief, even though you say that it is the case, and so it's kind of a peculiar position. But beliefs can be false, and people have to accept that. And you could be wrong. You could have a false belief. I can believe in my head the Rams will win every single game, even if they're not playing.
So let's do this.
I can
We're
hold
going
it.
to take a 10-minute break. The restroom is down the hall on your left. If it's too crowded, there's one upstairs as well. And we are going to have some coffee, refreshments. For those following on Facebook, hang on. We'll be back in about 10 minutes, and let's take a break.
Hey, guys.
the way I like it.
Welcome back to the Atheist and Christian Book Club, a monthly gathering of both believers and skeptics, respectfully discussing important books from both perspectives. We are going to be part 2 now of the January 2020 book club, where we have a special guest, Steve McRae. We're discussing epistemology and specifically agnostic epistemology. How do we know what we don't know? Now, I have a little video I'd like to share with you to kind of get our thoughts back together as we progress on this. And this is basically Ben Stein interviewing, who was it? Richard Dawkins.
Oh, not that way.
And,
Oh, no, that's not fair.
Can you quantify the probability of God? And the difference between a global atheist versus a local atheist is what we've been talking about. And so this little short clip, this comes up, and this, do we have justification for our beliefs? So let's watch that now.
Professor Dawkins seemed so convinced that God
preventing me from doing this. This is not fair. It's overreaching.
Well, the good thing is I still have it on mute, so.
Okay. Well, let's do this. I will try to get that up later. So let's talk a little bit more about. I'm very fascinated. Steve mentioned this in my interview with you initially. I mentioned this in my interview with you initially last week, but when you said that atheists ought to be able to do have a burden of proof on some level for giving a positive reason for their lack of belief. You do get a lot of pushback and a lot of controversy on that. I'm somewhat perplexed about that because to me it sounds reasonable, but I hear the same argument that I don't have to have any evidence for my lack of belief because I'm not making a positive proposition. I'm not saying I believe anything. And so can you tell me a little about why you do think there's a burden of proof, and tell us about some of the pushback you've gotten from the atheist community?
Yeah, okay. I have never met a philosopher that doesn't think that atheists have a burden of proof. Carrier will argue that atheists have a burden of proof. He argues it's already been met. He'll look at it, okay, well, there are exceptions to every rule. But the notion that a burden of proof is justificatory, then you're just saying, what is the reasons I have for my position? That's all you're saying. Am I justified to hold this particular position? So if you say that you do not believe that gods exist, there, as Jim pointed out, that's a dichotomy. You believe or you don't believe. Well, you still have to pick one, right? I mean, you either believe or you don't believe. So am I justified to believe? And if not, why am I justified not to believe? These still require justifications for why you hold a particular position. Because if you're not justified to not believe, then you should be justified to believe.
Well, let's take an example. Richard was here, and he said
I know
that if you compare this room to the universe, Earth is like, a little grain of sand or whatever. So what a vast waste of space. That doesn't sound like a God. Do you find that a compelling argument?
Yeah, but that doesn't really go into the reasons why atheists have a burden of proof. I mean,
just as one of his evidences, what do you think?
Well, I mean, if God's infinite, then how small we are to the universe will it make a difference? I mean, if God,
didn't you make that argument?
If God can create multiverse,
but I never got credit for it.
You got this is the highest credit.
Now, my argument would be this, and this is something that I haven't really talked much with, but maybe you guys can suss it out for me. Maybe Stephen Hoyt back there could probably help. But okay, I believe we have a multi-one level universe. Okay, a multiverse, which is called level 1. I think that most astrophysics have taught, astrophysicists accept that. It means that we have an observable universe that we're limited by. That's called the Hubble's volume. That would be called a level 1 multiverse. Now, level 2 and level 3, they're more isolated. These are spatial temporally isolated universes that have really no causal relationship to us, so to speak. There are some arguments for dark flow, but assuming that they are isolated from each other, then my argument would be, why did God create all these other multiverses that we would never be able to have access to, regardless if they exist or not? Whether, if they exist, we cannot actually go to another multiverse. we're locked out of it. We cannot access it. We cannot have information about it. Can never have knowledge about it. So why did God waste his time making them?
Well, first of all, how much scientific evidence do we have for multiverse?
Well, like I said, I accept that level 1s exist, because level 1 would just mean our observable Hubble volume. That would be considered to be what's called a level 1.
Well, even our own universe, wouldn't you agree, Dan, we can only look 13 billion years out or whatever?
Yeah, we know, whether beyond that is outside forever. It's.
But I mean, isn't it just over 100 billion galaxies, or 300 billion, whatever, with 300 billion, I mean, it's just, what's the point?
But, well, again, but if God is infinite, then to him it makes no difference. If he could create a universe that's 13 billion light years old, or 20 billion, 1,000 billion, it doesn't make no difference.
The inverse is also true. How small does it have to be in order to allow for a God? Bigger than a bread box?
Well,
can the galaxy be on Orion's belt?
One Milky Way is plenty. Okay.
Well, it's overkill, but I mean, by the same token, if you have a couple sands on the beach, or you have, beaches all around the world.
Another one of Richard's points was 99.9% of this universe is lethal radiation. Right. And you have a black hole in just about each galaxy, which is a destructive thing. What's the point of that? Well, I mean, is that a compelling argument to you?
By the same token, like Hugh Ross would argue that's the opposite. The fact that we are life in all that we still exist. Because in Probable Planet, I mean, he argues, and I don't think it's a bad argument, it doesn't get you where you want to go, but he does argue somewhat effectively, there has been catastrophic events, that he names 5, if I remember correctly, and after each catastrophic event, we have become the outcome of all that. Because of these catastrophic events, we would not exist without them. Why haven't we been wiped out?
Well, that's another thing, like the permanent extinction wipes out 90%.
Now, well, like I said, I don't think it gets him where he wants to go, but you can't just by saying fiat, it's a bad argument for his book, right? But the Christian would argue, well, yeah, I mean, the likelihood of us existing is pretty improbable based on the fact that we've had a lot of extinction level events. Okay, that's a fair argument. Let's discuss that, right? But to say that the universe is so huge and it's conducive to more black holes than us, well, yeah, black holes can't observe things. We have the anthropic principle. We can observe the universe, right? So if we can observe the universe, we have to be here to observe the universe. But why are we here to observe the universe? Black holes don't care. They're inert in all this, right? Yes, the universe might need these black holes for us to exist, but then you can say, well, God created these black holes.
Well, and Ray would say that wasn't Salamander Girl saying that they actually have beneficial.
Salamander, Sarah Salamander.
Whatever.
She's an astrophysicist.
Salamander would be.
I know she is. Yes.
No, I love Sarah and her husband are wonderful. So Salamander.
Yeah, she's going to.
Whatever.
We were supposed to get her on the Non-sequitur show. We're going to try to in the future. Yeah, I know.
She's been through a lot.
She says she would join.
But she would say black holes are.
Yeah. So
came to believe in Jesus because of black holes. Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah, she was at the UC San Diego when she lost her atheism, and strolling across the campus one day. I mean, it was kind of an epiphany that she came to the real. I mean, she was raised in Canada, raised in a secular home, raised as an atheist, and not just no true Scotsman atheist. She was as atheist could be, and through her study of astrophysics and black holes, she studied with Stephen Weinberg, worked at UT Austin for years, and her chapter in her book is fantastic. But yeah, black holes are. She relates them to God's character and God's nature. They're scary. They're difficult to understand. We don't really know what's going on. We just photographed one. They're They're called monstrous. There's all these qualities, and even Sir Arthur Eddington, when they were doing the math, and Robert Oppenheimer didn't want to follow the math where they were leading. And so in the 1950s and 60s, these things were ridiculous, and now they're everywhere.
Yeah, the only thing I would argue on that is black holes only have 3 things. Right, angular momentum, charge, and or mass. That's the only 3 things that.
So far as we know, at the present time.
Yeah, no hair throw. So I mean, God would be a lot more. Divine simplicity. He would have obviously just his essence, I guess. But I don't want to be able to relate God to black holes.
She has a point. I mean, God is capricious and destructive. So just read the Old Testament.
Well, unless God says according to.
That's one of his benefits.
If God wants something, right? First of all, he has the power, omnipotency to do it, right? But then you have to ask, well, why did he want to? And the explanation would be, well, because he wanted to. But that's not an explanation why he wanted to.
Before we move on to further that point out, Daniel Ray is on the staff here at Watchman Fellowship. He's a co-author and editor of the book, The Story of the Cosmos. There's a whole chapter in there just on the black holes, and it was written by her.
Yeah, I have the book.
And she is, she's not making the case that the black hole spelled out the word God or something like that. She's making a whole different point of why that helped her to get out of her fixed way of thinking, to think about, is it even possible outside of my fixed way of thinking that there is a God that I've never considered? Just like black holes were never considered by mainstream science because they were too outrageous to exist.
Yeah, in fact, it was the expert, Eddington, whose grad student, I think he was grad student, Chandrasekhar, the Indian astrophysicist, who calculated the math that led to white dwarfs and the Chandrasekhar limit, and Eddington didn't want to follow the math. And so here's this, Eddington was primarily responsible for nuclear physics of stars that we understand, and confirmed Einstein's theory in 1919 off the coast of Africa. But Eddington didn't want to follow the math. Oppenheimer didn't want to follow the math.
Why didn't they want to?
It was leading them into ridiculous logic. Black holes. Yeah, black holes. How can space-time fabric have an infinite, endless hole?
The math goes to infinite density, which is kind of shocking.
Is counterintuitive, shocking. Where does it all go? What happens to the information in this context?
But you're right. A macro version of particle physics. It's so counterintuitive that you don't want to go there.
But the math works out. I mean, for a white dwarf,
that's
you take a neutron star, white dwarf, and you go down from the electron degenerate pressures to more neutron degenerate pressures, and you go past other limits that exist, you have a black hole.
Yeah.
So if you take like the sun and you condense it to 2.95 kilometers, you have a black hole. We know that was mathematically the case.
Yeah,
they know that, but it's shocking to the mind because they, like you said, they didn't want to accept that you have an infinite.
So I think you have John Wheeler, who died a couple years ago.
Wheeler
followed the math. Yeah. And the people that followed the math, lo and behold, we have black holes. And we just photographed one in April.
But why go and create a galaxy just to get sucked up into a black hole?
Richard Carrier made this point when he was sitting right in that chair. Richard Carrier said, it's so destructive that there's a God, why would he make something so harmful and destructive as a black hole? How many people so far have been killed by black holes, would you say?
The Center for Disease Control has confirmed that there has been no black hole fatalities ever since their discovery.
Oh, and speaking of evolutionists, the guy that we read The Language of God or whatever, Francis Crick or whatever, goes, this is highly educated people. He goes and sees a frozen waterfall. He goes, that's it, I believe in God. Well, I mean, it's just there. It goes right out the window.
Right? I mean, Dr. Don Cruz asked this friend of mine. They will come to different conclusions, but I heard him and Sarah would probably agree on the physics, obviously.
Absolutely.
Right?
There's no question about the physics.
Right. That's objective. Right? So we can objectively look at the physics and look at the math.
And they predicted what they would find, and their prediction, they found it.
But that's the difference between objective and subjective evaluations. We don't have access to the mind of God. So if God says this is the case, that is what we call ethical subjectivism, because we cannot ask God and have access to that for it to be objective.
But now, what about in a position of agnostic epistemology, making that statement about access to God's mind? How would you assess?
Well, okay, if objective is that word that's bantered around quite a bit, okay, and in moral discourse, objective, just the way I would interpret it, is that two people can look at something and reach a conclusion because they both have access to that information.
Right.
Okay, it is an objective fact that I have the cup in my hand. Right, you can argue otherwise, but we both can look at it and objectively reach an evaluation of it. Right? But if I say I have a headache, that's subjective. You can't come into my head and go, oh, I can experience this to objectively validate that I actually have a headache. You can do testing, blah, 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 but the actual sensation and all that is internalized, is epistemically off limits to you. So when we talk about subjective and objective distinctions, I'm using it more objective. People can look at something. Mathematics is objective. I can do a differential equation or something like that and say, this is what you're gonna reach if it's correct, right? But if subjectively, you cannot go, hey God, why do you have this as a rule? Because even then he just tells you, which you may argue, some people do argue what's called ethical objectivism, but to me, it's still, why does he have that rule? He could tell you, but he could be lying, or what makes it objective at that point? Because it's still, if I say, hey, let's play a game of chess, right? If we sit down to play actual chess, there are objective rules to the game. We can both read the rules. And you can say, well, what happens if I want bishops to move, like a knight? Well, then we're no longer playing chess. We're playing some variant. But if we want to sit down and actually say, this is our grounding, these are the rules, we're going to play chess, that is objective, that we can both look at that. That's what we mean by objective morality. Two people can look at something and go, this is objectively the case. It doesn't mean absolute.
But you have to acknowledge that there's an appeal to an objective even when there's like local disagreement on what that objective is. Nobody says this is what we ought to do just because I'm the only one that feels that way.
Yeah.
We're always implying that there's some rule out there written, even though we're disagreeing. No, the rule is this, and I say the rule is that, but we're appealing to an external rule.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people don't like the fact that once two people or people will have the same grounding, you can make an objective moral framework. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with Matt Dillon on this. When he talks about objective morality, the way he's wording it is right. Because if I say, you and I, we want to have these rules, let's say we want to appoint, like Edamoya, we want to have human flourishing, we want to have harms and benefits, whatever is our grounding, if we all agree upon those being our axioms, then you can build an objective moral framework.
But that's subjective still, because
Well,
you're
it's
talking
not,
about
though.
getting a group of people together and voting
The
on it.
axioms are subjective, they're subjective, but only for the fact that I want to build mathematical framework, like the reals, right? We can say, I can pick and choose Pino's axioms, I can pick and choose from ZFC theory. I can say I want the axiom of choice, or I don't want the axiom of choice. But once you've...
You don't call that subjective?
Once you've said, these are the axioms we want, I can build mathematics from it. 1 + 1 = 2 is objective, even though the axioms are what we choose to have in order to make that objective.
How do you define objective?
That we both have access to. We both look at mathematics and go, these are the axioms we have, Pino's axioms. We can say 0 is a number, 1, we have,
Just
iterations.
accepted by faith, Eric, okay?
Steve, I think was gonna
But you would agree that 1 + 1 = 2 is objective, right?
Yeah, but I would say objective is external to both of us.
It's external, yeah, well, it's external, right,
Whether-
because my headache is internalized.
Because you have a soul, yes, but it's in other words, whether we can access or not is, I would say, irrelevant to whether or not it's objective.
I think objective is more of an externalist case.
So, Steve, would you say that mathematics are accessible to all of us like the rules of chess? Are they external to us, or did we create them or discover them?
You know what, the whole mathematics created, whether it discovered, I'm not gonna get into that because there's no right
Well,
answer.
I mean, seriously, to your question, though.
I think mathematics is created myself.
It's a placeholder
I don't
we
think
use
it's
as symbols
discovered,
to explain things.
personally.
Created?
Yeah, I think mathematics is created, but only because we can have, like, you can have constructivist mathematics, you can have different types of mathematics, like Galois theory, which is not, if I say 1 + 1 = 4, you can actually make some mathematics behind all that. So, but once you have like the reals, once you have the axioms for that, then it becomes objective because you can be no other way.
The other Steve, I think, had something.
Yeah, I was just gonna maybe clarify, there's a difference that has a name that Steve's trying to express, and the difference is between objective being ontological and objective being epistemic. When you're talking about epistemic, you're talking about agreements and judgments that we all have and what are the bases of those. So we can have a cultural understanding or agreement on how we should proceed to act, and if someone falls outside of the norm, we would have an objective basis. Even though it's subjective, it's also objective at the same time. The only time that those two are mutually exclusive terms is under the idea that there's something external to everybody, like a God, that is like truth itself. There's an object in the world called truth, and it's out there and we're just trying to discover it. Or something objective like you're talking about with mathematics, where it's not a product of the mind, it's a
Right.
part of the universe.
So back to
Those
the
are
chess
it's not a product
analogy-
of the mind, there's ontology.
So back to the
involved.
chess analogy, then you would say that it's not a brute fact, nor is it intrinsically has to be that knights move this way. It was subjective initially.
Yes.
Yeah,
But then once
absolutely.
there
Yeah,
was
there's no
community
ontological
agreement
reasons why
of that.
knights have to move
Right.
that way.
It's like
Right.
a stoplight is red, that's just an arbitrary choice,
Right.
but if you run it, you're objectively breaking the law.
Yeah, well, the
right?
same thing like this. There's an ontological condition that I have a cup. Okay, there's an ontology there.
Right.
But how I'm viewing the color, whether that's silver or gray or whatever, there's subjective evaluations of it, right? But objectively speaking, both of you and I can look at this and say, look, I'm showing you a cup, and you can look at it and go, yeah, I see objectively that there's a cup there. Maybe your brain's not wiring properly, and you may, well, that's not a cup, that's a fancy mug or something or whatever. And you might believe it'd be something else, but there is an objective fact of the matter to be had. How you're
So this is
evaluating
a
it,
cup.
that's a cup, that's a mug. So that he's exactly right. I think there's a difference between the ontology versus the epistemological things that you have something to be had that can be evaluated by multiple people.
So would you-
The rules of tests are objective like that.
Would you say mathematics is ontologically real or epistemologically real?
I believe mathematics are abstract. Now, they can be shown by some kind of concretism. I mean, you can put one rock and another rock and have two rocks. But mathematics is, to me, abstract. I'm not a Platonist, although I accept, when a mathematician says mathematical Platonism, it's not like what you think of Platonism, like there's some archetype. The reason why they have mathematical Platonism over something like a different approach is that, technically speaking, with the Quine thesis, he's saying that because we utilize mathematics as utility, therefore we have to treat it as something that actually exists. The way I'm interpreting Quine, Hoyt could probably talk a lot more about that because it's really beyond.
Did you see Penrose and Craig this past fall?
Roger Penrose?
Yeah, Roger Penrose and Bill Craig sat down, and unbelievable. Penrose actually conceded. I think it's not something new, but he believes that mathematics has some kind of objective, sort of Platonic existence.
Yeah, he's probably a mathematical Platonist.
Yeah, somewhat. I don't know if he's a Platonist exactly, but he does believe that it's external to us.
Yeah, the other one would be a nominalist, and I think there's some arguments against nominalism, but nominalism is a lot more simpler. Like I said, I'm fascinated when somebody chooses one or the other. Well, why you're a nominalist, why you're a mathematical Platonist. There's no, to me, right answer to it. It's just a philosophical disposition if you want to accept it as abstract or you want to accept it as something that is actually has some existence because we do use it. But again, like I said, Hoyt might be a heck of a lot better on that topic than me.
TJ, what was your comment?
Would you, am I way off on that, Hoyt?
Dude, you're perfect.
Oh, okay, hey, Hoyt approves, yay!
Do you believe that math is a force with agency or something? It's only it's only a placeholder we're using to describe things we see in
Yeah,
reality.
it's a language. I mean,
It's a
the
language
mathematics
that
that we
we
use
created.
are symbolic of something greater than the actual symbols themselves.
I know, we created it. We
Well,
set
that's-
up the rules
that's-
for it and it works
I think
because
we-
of the way reality works.
Well, no.
Hey,
I
TJ,
think-
when you get a chance, read Quine's indispensability theory.
Yeah, read that.
Yeah.
I feel like when Christians start
did
talking about,
mathematical
well,
per-
is
let me ask
science
this,
real?
people.
Is math real?
I was just asking what's.
Let me just ask, did it exist before there was human thought? Did the rules of mathematics still apply?
Hey, TJ, how about this?
Not until somebody put an idea to it.
Let me blow your mind real quick. As I said, there was an ontological fact of the matter we have, but there's something called mereological nihilism, which says that cup doesn't actually exist. It's just a rearrangement of existing primitives, which would be your atoms. So it's like if I have a picture that's filled with just dots, like a dot matrix, does that picture actually have ontology? It's just an arrangement of dots. Is there an actual picture
Right,
there?
it's arbitrarily
So,
decided upon by us.
so
but
we
it's
could actually
actually
argue
makes sense, yeah.
there's a arrangement of atoms to be had here, but is there actually an object called a cup there?
It's a
It's called
placeholder
mereological
we use
nihilism.
it's a placeholder we use to describe a thing.
Philosophy sucks, doesn't
And
it?
then,
Well,
there's things we know we don't know?
How do you know there's a cup there? Right.
Right.
How do you know there's a cup there? Because if you're a mereological nihilist, you'd say, well, there isn't a cup there.
It's
It's
like
just a rearrangement of atoms in the shape of a cup.
Think about it, there is no spoon.
So that
There is
gets,
no lamp, there is no light, there's no table.
that gets me to a point I wanted to make. You were a person of faith at one time.
Yeah, well, I was Mormon, yeah.
Yeah. And do you think you might have overthought yourself out of your faith?
No, I think I asked
Not only
myself-
Mormonism, but God.
No, I think that I asked myself, am I actually justified to hold the position? I realized I wasn't. Simple as that.
But you don't think you're overthinking this thing?
No, I think it's pretty simple.
Oh, really? Oh, that's what.
We have a question.
I mean, look,
Yeah.
we don't actively have dispositional thoughts all the time. We don't actively go around thinking, everything that I think, do I reevaluate? But I think there's some bigger concepts that over time we do ponder to ourselves. We do reevaluate. We do come back to. We revisit. And I think that the great debate question, the existence of God, people all the time reevaluate that question.
Do we have one?
This is, circling back to the belief versus knowledge or facts, and it's kind of a personal question or a practical question. For you, do you have a fact or a knowledge that provides you or gives you reason for living?
Well, I mean, I can argue like
For living?
Yes. You're basically, there's something called axiology, which is value, right? What's the value you have in life? What's the meaning that you have for your existence? People could argue a lot of different things. I could say, I have a reason for living because I have a daughter, right? I have nothing wrong with that. I have value in that. I think when people say, well, atheists don't have any value or any meaning, I think it's a bad approach, because people can have meanings in their lives. You can argue whether they're intrinsic or not. I don't really care whether they're intrinsic or not. To me, it makes no difference. People give their lives value because there's something in their life that they want to attribute meaning to. They want to attribute value to. I have no issue with that whatsoever. And so when I hear a lot of people like, well, if you don't believe in God, you can have, what's the point of living? You're just going to die and be ashes. Well, I have a point to living. I have friends, I have family. There is something to be said for that. I think it's.
You're going to have a YouTube channel again? Yes. Yeah.
Well, I have two.
Oh, even more. Your life is complete.
Yeah, I want my third back. But yeah, so yeah, to answer your question, I think that atheists absolutely can have value to their lives.
Can you tell us about agnostic epistemology?
Yeah, well, I've kind of figured that out myself, actually. Because I didn't know there's a whole field just dedicated to epistemology. Going back to what it does, I just think that people need to understand agnosticism contrary to what they've been told. If you hear somebody saying agnosticism is about knowledge, they're not wrong, but they're not being honest with themselves. They're trying to relate it to something that's not really typical of how the word is normatively understood in philosophy. Right? And I think it's a little dishonest approach, because when I say I'm agnostic, I'm not making any knowledge thing. It has nothing to do with knowledge. It legit, even though the etymology behind it is knowledge, I'm saying that I don't have a belief either way. Agnosticism is a belief position. It is just what Jim pointed out, a second order belief position. It's a belief about a belief. And so a lot of people have a hard time separating those things. So they hear agnosticism, oh, well, you're saying that you don't know God exists. No, that's not how the term is understood. If you read anything out there, agnosticism almost always going to be used as an ontological thing on the existence of God. Do you believe that God exists? Do you not? What's your position in relationship to God's ontology, not epistemology?
Okay, to clarify though, you're not saying that you're agnostic because you believe that no one can know.
Yeah.
Question.
When I say I would be what's called a zero data agnostic or temporal agnostic or weak agnostic, which is saying that I don't think anybody has the ability to know if God exists or not. That is true, but that's not how I use the term agnostic, because that's not how it is understood. But if I say I'm a weak agnostic, then that is actually a knowledge position. That is actually saying that I don't believe that people have the ability to know if God exists or not. Or I don't know if they can. Actually, it's more specific. It's I don't know if people can know or not. The hard agnostic will say man does not have the ability to know. I'm a little more relaxed on that. I'm like, I don't have any idea whether man can know if God exists or not.
Yeah, but there comes a point where you've got to live your life either believing in God and going by Christian values, or going by what us atheists do, like Richard Carrier and so forth, where he wrote Sense of Goodness, and he's gotten into a whole mess of moral issues. And, and myself, it's like, do you ever think, oh my gosh, I'm like out on the ledge here, how do I make my own value judgment?
No, because I base it on virtue epistemology. A virtue ethics, either one. So virtue epistemology would be like, I'm open-minded. Okay, it's an epistemic virtue to be open-minded, to be able to change my position. But a virtue ethics person would say, what is it that the most ethical thing that we want to obtain out of this? And it's usually between two vices. The Aristotelian version would be, for example, like honesty. Honesty is a virtue. You don't want to lie, but you don't want to be brute honest. You want to be so honest that you hurt people. So you want a middle ground. It's called a golden mean. So I try to have virtues that are in between two vices.
Kind of like the categorical imperative.
I reject Kantian ethics. Though. I don't accept the fact that you should never lie, but there are reasons to lie when you don't want to be brute honest. It's based on their. For example, I'll give you an example. If somebody's on their deathbed, to comfort them, if you have to lie to them to make them comforted, I have no issue with that. Like I had somebody, I'm not going to call them out, but people might remember. They were asked the question on the Non-sequitur show, if you had a dying relative, a dying friend, would you pray with them as an atheist? And they were like, no. And I thought that was silly. I was like, look, you don't have to believe it, right? I don't believe it, but if I have somebody who wants some comfort and they want to pray with them, I'm going to do it. It just goes to the motions, right?
Yeah, and that's interesting. It's like,
why not? I have no problem with that. Are you lying at that point? Maybe to your.
We have to make these.
That's just my.
Well, I was just going to say we have to make these nuanced moral judgments, which are very.
Morality sucks. It's not easy.
Yeah.
One year we had my friend Bill, the atheist, over for Thanksgiving with my family. And so I had all my extended family over there, and Bill, and they didn't know who Bill was, but he's my friend, so he's over here sharing Thanksgiving with us. And so we have so much to be thankful for this year, and so I said, I'm going to ask Bill to lead us in prayer.
Oh, no.
And just left it out there. And
Atheist
Bill,
prayers are cool.
he paused for a second and then started to do it, probably just as a friendship.
Oh, I don't even remember
thing.
that well.
But then I rescued him. Said, no, Bill, let me pray.
Well, even as a Christian, when they used to say, you know, a group like this, Bill, can you lead us in prayer? I just was like a deer in the headlights. I mean, it just,
Well,
I froze.
I mean, look, if an atheist wants to like do a prayer, but not like to a God thing, there are ways of saying kind words and not relating it to a deity. But like I said, if somebody's dying on their deathbed and they just want some comfort and they want you to pray with them, why not? I find it to be not virtuous not to do that.
But doesn't it bother you? It kind of bothers me a little bit that we don't have a standard like Christians do. They can look at an absolute ontological moral standard. We can't. We got to do it on our own.
I mean, most atheists I know that are in philosophy are objective morality.
Okay.
They actually accept objective morality.
Okay.
But again, people confuse objective morality with absolutism. Those are not the same things. And so objective morality is a meta-ethical position. It is what your stance is in relationship to, does a moral fact exist? Is there a proposition to it? And is something that can be looked at by multiple people? That's what objective morality means. It doesn't mean it's absolute in all times and all places. It just means, is there something that is a proposition that expresses a moral fact that can be evaluated by multiple people? That's
Ken,
how I
like,
evaluate. That's how I
Ken, in your like immoral atheist lifestyle, do you have trouble forming moral standards?
Well, I mean, if I'm being honest, I grew up as a Christian, so, and I live in a Christian milieu with my family and so forth, so it has served me well to continue living in that.
Oh, so you're like kind of agreeing with Frank Turek that you're stealing from Christianity and God.
Whatever you want to call it.
Well, but you could appeal to utilitarianism, you could appeal to consequentialism, you could appeal to virtue ethics.
Right.
I don't find that it's one or nothing, you can do multiple things.
Thanks, Steve, that helps actually.
Isn't that question begging that you're appealing to something that would be good, which is essentially the whole question?
What is the good?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Right. I think that's
What is the good?
That's the problem for a non-believing science, that if you're going to say, well, let's appeal to this, well, why should we appeal to that? Because that's a good thing to do. Well, then you're kind
There's a hard question to be asked by why should we do something, right? I mean, that's why when I appeal to virtue ethics, it is very hard to say, well, why should we appeal to virtue ethics? There's a meta-narrative that we have there that's very difficult to answer. Again, I do want to ground it in amoia. I do want to ground it in harms and benefits. That's my foundation.
So you think that's good, right?
Without going into naturalism, you know, which is like, and I mean like when you look at like the good, what is the naturalistic approach to non-naturalistic, and I'm talking about like naturalism is like science, right? Science has naturalism versus supernaturalism, but as the good, the term naturalist approach is a little bit different, if you know what I'm talking about. Like Moore, G.E. Moore.
Okay, I'm not sure what you're getting at.
You know what, I'm going to bring Hoyt on there. Can you explain G.E. Moore's naturalist approach a little bit easier? It's hard to describe what they mean by non-natural and natural, because it's not what they mean by supernatural and natural.
Maybe go this way. If there were 1,000 clones of me, I would probably agree what the good is. And we're human beings in that same kind of sense. We're not exact copies, but we're human beings, and that's
There's a commonality there. Yeah.
To have objective, when we say something, everybody's pretty much going to have the general thrust. And when we get to different cultures, they'll have different expressions of how it's going to be applied, but the principle behind it's the same.
Yeah. So the Christian was
there's something that's
the law is written on our
there's a
hearts.
good commonality
Yes,
in all parties, even though there's what's called cultural relativism. They might have moral differences and descriptive moral differences between cultures, but as you pointed out, as a human whole, I think there is something to be said by there's a common good that's ubiquitous, right? Now people can disagree with that or agree, but again, these are positions. There's no right or wrong answer. You know, it's just do you want to hold that position that there are certain things that are fundamental to all humans?
Yeah, Jim had a
There's
point.
an evolutionary explanation for that.
That could be an explanation of evolution. Sure,
it's written on our hearts, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the natural.
Well,
That's
the
the natural
evolution-
thing. You can say that yes, it's written on all of our hearts, but the real payoff is what do you get by saying that?
Well,
Because on a naturalist account or whatever, we're still trying to have a moral conversation where morality is the actual concern, and neither of these comments do anything.
Does Darwinism in any way lead to what we would normally look at, that we would all kind of agree for whatever reason would be ethical and moral? Or is it animals eating animals?
Well, I was going to say, let me give you an example. If you had a society where everybody killed their children, you would not have a society. That applies to all societies. No, I think it's bad. I mean, but again, it is bad to kill all your children because then you don't have a society. So if you're grounding it on flourishing of society, that could be objectively looked at and said, it is bad to kill all the children.
That's
right?
given the flourishing society.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
do
no,
this.
we have
I
more.
want to try again to pick up this interview and see if we're able to do it this time. But this is Richard Dawkins being interviewed by Ben Stein, and it's on some of the questions that's coming up. Well, first of all, I want to, watching this, would you say that maybe Richard Dawkins is really maybe more leans agnostic than atheist by this answer, and also the difference, getting a little bit to the idea of local atheism versus a more universal atheism. So let's try it now.
Professor Dawkins seemed so convinced that God doesn't exist that I wondered if he would be willing to put a number on it.
Well, it's hard to put a figure on it, but I mean, I'd put it as something like, 99% against or something.
Well, how do you know it's 99%
I don't.
against, say, and not 97%?
No, I did. You asked me to put a figure on it, and I'm not comfortable putting a figure on it. I just think it's very unlikely.
What? But you couldn't put a number on it?
No, of course not. No.
So it could be 49%.
Well, it would be. I mean, I think it's unlikely, but it's quite far from 50%.
How do you know?
I don't know. I mean, I put an argument in the book.
So the Hebrew God, the God of the Old Testament, he doesn't exist in your view?
Certainly. I mean, that would be a very unpleasant prospect.
And the Holy Trinity of the New Testament?
Nothing like that.
Do you believe in any of the Hindu gods? Like Vishnu?
How can you ask such a question?
You don't,
How could I? I
Do you
mean,
believe
why
in-
would I, given that I don't believe in any others?
You don't believe in the Muslim God?
No. I mean, why do you even need to ask?
Well, I just wanted to be sure. So you don't believe in any God anywhere?
Any God anywhere would be completely incompatible with anything that I've said
I assume. I just wanted to make sure. You don't believe in any God anywhere?
No.
A 99 to 1% chance. If I knew I had a 1% chance of winning the lottery, I would play every week.
Yeah.
So again, I've noticed in the last decade and a half, Dawkins really prefers to say there probably is no God rather than there is no God, because I think even he's wrestling with this idea, unless you have all knowledge, then how can you know for sure there's no God? To have all knowledge, then, well, I guess we do have a God, because we have something omniscience.
Yeah, I don't like that argument, though. First of all, Ben Stein is as dishonest as can be in this argument. I mean, he's literally one of the most dishonest people in these types of discussions. I think he was leading, I think he was manipulating, and it was horrible. And I agree, okay, I'm not a huge fan of Dawkins, but I think he's right on this. First of all, I don't like assigning probabilities, okay? I understand the reasoning behind it, but I don't think we should place beliefs solely on probabilities. So they're just an estimate. Look, if I say, what's the probability of, I'm looking up and I'm sailing a ceiling? Well, it's pretty high, right? If you're a skeptic, though, you can't say it's certainty, because, by the way, knowledge doesn't require certainty. Knowledge requires certain conditions. Certainty is not one of them unless you have what's called a strong belief case. And I don't accept the strong belief case for knowledge. I don't think it's required. Most people I know think that way. Certainty is not something that's required. But Dawkins is right on this, that, look, she's asking him, well, where would you place it? And he's just giving him a range. Okay, well, here's the number. And he's like, well, that means you don't know. Well, actually, if you're at 99% and you're just kind of, you're meeting the other conditions, I mean, Dawkins probably would say that, I know Thor doesn't exist, or I know Vishnu doesn't exist. But can he say that I know there are no gods? I don't think he'd make that case. But Ben Stein's asking about local atheism and not global atheism. And I think that's kind of a dishonest approach.
Yeah, but even once you say that when you give any percentage, this gets back to weak atheists versus strong atheists. If you are like 90% sure there's no God, can you call yourself an atheist?
Yes.
Okay, what percentage,
Uh,
what
I-
is
I-
it, 51%?
No,
What-
again, I hate quantizing
Right,
beliefs,
right.
because I don't like the Dawkins scale. I wrote a blog on it, www.greatdebateCommunity.com. I wrote a blog on the Dawkins scale. I think it has major issues to it. But if I had a place like a range, then agnosticism would be like 40 to 60%, right? But these are arbitrary values. There's no line of demarcation there. But if I say I'm 99.999% convinced that there's a God, you're a theist. You're a theist. I mean, who's going to say I'm 99.99999% the belief that's of the God, but I'm an atheist?
Steve, what do you think of the approach that does, I think it's Anthony Magnabosco, who does approach street epistemology with these, getting his interlocutors to quantify their position, their certitude about a particular belief. What do you think about that?
I know a lot of people go that route. You know, what would you kind of place it at? And again, that's fine for having a discussion, but I don't think it does much good in the long run, because I like Anthony Magnabosco, and I like some of the things with street epistemology. What I differ with him on is that he's trying to get people to undermine their justificatory conditions for their belief. And he and a lot of them relate it just to empiricism and just to like science or methodological approach. And yet there are pragmatic reasons to have a belief. There are prudential reasons to have a belief. People might justify a particular belief that is not based upon some kind of evidentialism or based upon some kind of empiricism that might be rationally approached. And I think that because the people that they talk to are not that knowledgeable about the topics, that they're basically, it's not dishonest, but it's just a little hanky.
Do you think he's
Because Anthony's not a dishonest guy.
Would you
He's
say
a
manipulative?
real straight up guy.
Do you think he's advocating some sort of leftover logical positivism, evidentialism?
Possibly, because I know a lot of people that they hate the term logical positivism, but that's what they seem to espouse.
Yeah, that's
TJ, you have something for us, I think?
I probably forgot my
And verificationism too, and they seem to espouse a lot of that.
But if you've ever seen this guy on the streets of San Antonio, he just plays this Socratic method game.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like he interviewed this girl. She clearly was a deluded, Christian that had no idea what she believed. She just said, I just have faith. It's just something I feel. Just say you're a deluded Christian. You have no clue
I
what
like
you're
watching
talking
the
about.
street epistemology things. I'm not going to lie.
It's
I think
interesting.
they're fascinating to watch,
If
and I
he
think that
wasn't
some of
so
them are much better
genuine
than
and
others.
intellectually honest, I would agree with you, but he's a straight up guy.
Well, and
Oh,
two
straight
is-
up guy, yeah.
and I'd love to have him here, by the way. But he's
Very
like Peter Balkhogen out of the West Coast wrote a book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. And atheists hate to evangelize or hate to share their faith. And Magnabosco says, hey, I'll be your disciple. And so he actually has had some people say, oh, you're right. I'll deconvert.
But I noticed about Anthony, he's willing to modify things. He's willing to take the approach and the methodology and change it. I sent him an email one time when I first started getting involved in looking at the epistemology, or street epistemology. And he read it and he took a lot of it on board. It wasn't just me. It was me and a few other people that had some issues with the way he was approached. And I think he did want to better his system. I don't think Peter does. I think Peter, all he cares about is the mind virus. Theism is a mind virus. Religion is detrimental, blah, blah, blah. But I think Anthony has...
Yeah, he's very insulting.
So
he says the Christians don't belong at the big adults table.
And so Anthony has taken that core thing, but I think he's modified it in a way to try to improve upon it. And I can't fault him for that. I think he's really tried, because he's a straight up guy. And I think that even though there's some kind of issues with street epistemology, I'm fascinated by it. I like having Socratic discussions. Because I watched one where it was brilliant, because he was asking the woman about rocks and why rocks, like hematite, right? Well, it's good for the blood. Well, what makes it good for the blood? What is the reason? Who made that decision that it had to be good for the blood? Is there some kind of ontological fact to the matter, or is there a deity or some kind of supernatural that makes it the case? And that got the person to think, well, why is it hematite good for the blood? Why not amethyst or something? What makes something for rocks to be what they think it is? And I think that's a brilliant way of approaching a conversation, because he was trying to attack the justificatory conditions of why you believe rocks have certain powers. That's brilliant. I think that kind of street epistemology makes sense.
Oh, by the way, are you a kind of a street epistemologist? Do you have a need to enlighten Christians, to deconvert them? No need.
No need. And I've never tried to convert anybody to agnosticism. I've actually converted more atheists, probably, from agnostic to atheist than I have anything else.
Oh, okay.
Because a lot of them are just like, well, I just merely lack a belief. I'm like, well, do you really lack a belief, or do you actually hold there are no gods? Oh yeah, all gods are BS.
But
okay, then
most Christians,
well, you really. Here's the thing: if I believe something to be the case, I also lack a belief in it. So if I believe there are no gods, I lack a belief that God exists, right? One entails the other. So a lot of them try to downplay it and just say, well, I don't have to say I believe there are no gods, I just merely lack a belief. But when you ask them, well, do you actually think there are no gods? Oh yeah, all gods are made up. At that point, they are expressing that they have a belief that there are no gods. They're just trying to minimize it.
But can there be something like functional atheists that maybe technically they would be more agnostic, but they live their lives as if they're positively certain there's no God, therefore they functionally take
Well,
that
if you're
role.
certain there's a God, I mean, you're an atheist by any atheist.
No, I mean, they're really kind of like you. They're undecided on this, but in an undecided state, they don't say, "I'll play it safe and try to live more like a Christian," or "I'll try to spend half my life as believing in God and have." They decide, "I'm going to live my life as if I'm certain there's no God." So in a sense that where they may be technically agnostic, they're functionally atheist.
I get the functional atheism thing. I don't think this is a performance contradiction if you don't believe they're gods, but you want to like pray every so often, right? Or you some reason that you want to, like, if there's a small chance, right? But I think that if you actually believe there are no gods, and yet you live your life going to church and you live your life praying,
Which happens a lot.
Happens a lot.
Yeah.
That is to me a performance contradiction.
Yeah.
Because you actually believe there are no gods, but you're living your life as if there is. And by the same token, just by the opposite.
Bill goes to church more than I do.
I go to Todd's Revelation class, which actually is very good. But here's the problem: is you got these hip churches that they go to these community groups. Bible studies and Sunday school classes are out in a lot of these hip churches. So these Christians have no clue what they believe, and half the pastor, or most pastors I know, have no idea of scholarship or what really Christianity.
There's things in the Bible that I found out recently that I didn't even know was in there.
Yeah.
Bill, as an atheist, are you there to help those Christians?
Absolutely I am, because they don't know there's only 7 authentic letters of Paul. They don't know there's 2 different creation accounts. They know almost nothing.
Well, I mean,
it's just sad, and it's going to get worse and worse. I mean, these hip church, the only unforgivable sin there is not being hip.
Yeah,
that's the only thing you can
There's a lot of
be thrown
societal
out.
factors in church. A lot of people go to church for societal reasons, right?
Oh, really? I didn't know.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
I get that. But I will add on this real quick. The performance contradiction. There is something out there, and a lot of people don't want to recognize it. There's something called negation reasoning. And
Negation reasoning.
No, negation raising.
Raising.
You're
okay.
raising something to negation.
Okay.
And what that means is, if I say I don't believe something, you can't actually raise that to actually be the case. I believe it is the case. Now, this is not logic. Okay, logic does not work that way. Belief entails do not believe, but do not believe does not entail belief.
Say that again, slow.
Okay, so if I say
Thank you.
if I say I believe it to be the case, right? Okay, if I say I believe God exists, let me put it this way. If I believe there are no gods, I do not believe in gods, right? Makes sense. But if I say I do not believe in gods, that does not necessarily entail that I hold the belief that there are no gods, because I can be agnostic, right? But if I say, hey, are you going to the party tonight? And you say, well, I don't think I'm going to go to the party. We as a society, in Speech Act theory, would be, we're going to take that as, oh, they're not going. That's what we mean in communication. There's a illocutionary act there to be had, that that you're saying to the person, I'm not going to go to the party tonight. And
That's
so,
not really what you're saying.
but when I say I don't think I'm going to go tonight, we're communicating to them that we're not going, right? There's an what our elocution is what we say.
It's a language.
But our illocution is what we kind of mean, and the perlocution is how somebody understands it. If I say, hey, Ashley, you go to the party tonight, she says, I'm not going to. I don't think I'm going to go to the party tonight. My perlocutionary act is going to be, she's not going, because I think that's what she's trying to convey to me, because that's how we speak. If I say, do you have the time, and you just like, oh yeah, and you walk away. we communicate things that way. Well, do you have the time? Yeah. Well, let me tell you what time it is, because these are understood context.
When she says, let's just be friends, she really doesn't want to be friends.
Steve, are there
oh no, she means that. Yeah.
Are there restrictions with our English language or Spanish or Czech or whatever language? Are there language restrictions to barriers for understanding?
Well, I barely know Spanish. You know Spanish, but so I'm probably going to answer. But in English, there certainly is problems with English in communication.
Because when she said, "I don't think I'm going to the party tonight," if we were speaking in Spanish, that might come across completely different.
Sure, absolutely.
I could mean that I think I may not go. Like I'm saying, I have an idea. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to go.
But if I say K or S, right? I'm asking you what time is it, right? But if I asked in Spanish, do you have the type, tiempo, I guess.
KRS.
KRS is literally, what it would mean, KRS, what hour is it, right?
But we could do that in English.
Yeah.
We could ask, what time is it? Could you please
You
tell
know
me
what I'm
the
saying?
time?
No, tiene the world.
Well, in Spanish, you say cuántos años tiene. How many years do you possess, rather than how age are you?
That's why they.
Soy años español en la escuela, pero no me gusta hablar español, es muy difícil para mí. Pero es muy importante para el negocio de clientes también. That's all I know.
Gosh!
That's only because, you speak Spanish, I don't speak Spanish.
But Eric, don't you think it's a sad? Let me ask Eric.
Is it because I'm
Don't
Hispanic,
you?
you're asking?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm
Don't you think it's a sad thing what the church has come to with these? We're in the home of the mega churches. Where it's
Haven't
like
noticed, they're like everywhere.
It's ridiculous. It's a mile wide and an inch deep. I mean, and he's an apologist for the
Haven't noticed.
Atheist, is that a good thing? Or don't you like us to be an inch deep, or would you rather see more robust Christianity?
No, I enjoy talking to people like Eric that actually
Because
tries.
he's honest and walking.
Like, what's his name on the Atheist Edge? She kept asking this girl, it's like, do you care about the facts? Do you care about what the Bible? And she goes, not really. And he goes, there you go. You don't even care.
That's atheist experience.
So let me let you talk.
What's the difference?
We're not affiliated with them.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Atheist experience.
Yeah. Experience. What do you think, Eric? Is it a sad state or what?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think I love what guys like Steve does, where if you can articulate a position, and so oftentimes in conversation, if I'm in a conversation with someone and they're disagreeing, sometimes I like to stop and say, okay, wait, time out, because the objection you're giving me seems like you don't understand my argument. Could you reiterate my argument to me? And if I think you've got it, then please continue. If not, let's kind of do some.
I love that approach. Yeah, because you're a lot of times you'll see somebody who you think is understanding your argument. They're going through the motions, but you're like, I don't. Can you kind of like give me back my argument in your own words? And you can kind of tell whether they actually are addressing the argument or not. Because I've seen a lot of cases where people have not addressed the arguments, and what they do is they go on some tangent, some kind of rote memorization. They have a script.
Right.
Atheists and theists both do that. I've seen it across the board.
But don't you think you should help Christians by, explaining them the basics?
Why just Christians? Help anybody.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I like critical thinking. I promote reason. I promote what I think the core atheist used to be. I'm not a huge fan of the modern atheist skeptic community. I think they've lost their sight of things. I think they become just as dogmatic and ideological as some of the theist positions.
Amen.
And so and this is one of the reasons why he mentioned earlier why I'm controversial, is because they don't want to have to recognize that. They have become so dogmatic, and
fundamentalist atheists.
It's a fundamental, because they have a political agenda.
But we're the people of reason and science, not
they claim to be. But then when it comes to logic, I've actually had atheists tell me, just like Matt Slick. You know Matt Slick?
Yeah.
I've had discussions with Matt. And he has once told me, legit, well, the logic is right, Steve, that you're showing on paper, but in the real world, and I'm like, that's what I see atheists. I've actually, you've seen some of my logical arguments, and they'll be like, well, okay, yeah, your logic is correct, but in the real world, it doesn't work that way. And I'm like, but it's logic. It's like you can't pick and choose when the logic, you have to be the emissaries of logic and reason, and then dismiss it when it doesn't suit your narrative. And I see a lot of very fundamental atheists do that, unfortunately.
Well, on every side, Christian and atheist and the other categories, which we fail to mention most of the time in here, what you have is a polarization in all of our culture. And it's on one issue, is a political issue or an issue of sexuality or any one issue, and all of a sudden you're not on my team, I hate everything you've ever stood for, you don't have a brain in your head, I refuse to talk to you anymore, you're an evil person. And this is a culture that we're headed for. And so little things like this little book club is a way of...
And you can agree on 99 other things. Exactly. Yeah, I don't Sometimes you get out of step on one issue and you're out of the club.
Exactly. Well, I mean, but you agree with me that, hey, and I do accept this, since atheism is a position on proposition of God's ontology, it's nothing to really have a whole community upon. Okay, it's not a lot of things that, because atheism is so diverse, but they all agree about that one thing. Okay. And that's fine. There's nothing big deal about that. But when you have people out there like myself saying, hey, look, I'm not interested in going out and promoting atheism. That's not my agenda. Then all of a sudden I'm not on the team, even though I'm a non-believer like them.
Steve, what do you think? Very maybe elementary kindergarten Sunday school question. I've seen a lot of your videos and stuff. I don't think I've ever asked you or talked to you or heard you say, what do you believe about Jesus? Who is Jesus to you?
Well, I think he actually did. I think there's a kernel of truth to be had there. I think that somebody named Jesus did live during that time, that they did probably have some kind of following. Do I think he was like the Son of God? No. Do I think the Trinity is a coherent concept? No. So when people say, well, I know there's no such thing as a Trinity, I think they can make a case for that, because I think the Trinity is logically coherent. Myself. Now, again, a lot of discussions to be had about that, right? But I never accepted the Trinity, ever, even when I was like Mormon. They have a very different view of the Godhead. But you would know that. The way they look at that is quite different. But I think that like the mythicist approach, I think is flawed. But I don't study the Bible as well as many other friends that I know do, where they can actually weigh in and they go, look, this is why mythicism is wrong. But I think that it's a wrong approach, because I think what they're trying to do is by saying, hey, look, if we can eliminate Jesus ever existing, then anything that follows from it automatically falls like dominoes, right? And I think that's the reason they're trying to do it, whether it's historically accurate or not, because the history people are going, no, wait, we accept there was somebody named Jesus, even the atheist scholars accept there was some historicity there. And so I'm going to defer to the experts on that, because I got to tell you, Bible, not my thing. I don't know much about the Bible, to be honest with you. I've read chunks of it, and I have a very basal understanding of it, but I'm not going to get into nitty-gritty detail when Danny was, or when, how many different epistles and this and that. I don't care. It's just not a fascinating topic to me. I don't care about the Bible that much.
Now, Bill would say Jesus was a failed apocalyptic prophet.
Well, that's the last 100 years of scholarship, ever since Albert Schweitzer's book, and that makes total sense. And as Ken said, you can read, what's that book? Dale Allison?
Yeah, Prophet of the New Millennium.
Jesus,
millenarian and prophet.
Yeah. That's the best way to understand.
I just know if I hear Josephus or Titus one more time. Tacitus, yeah, Tacitus, not Titus. See, that tells you about it.
Well, those
Tacitus and Josephus.
Those aren't good arguments.
It's all you ever hear when you hear about the mythicist versus historicist argument.
But we read what's his name's book, Nailed, and he would not give an inch.
David Fitzgerald.
Yeah, the Galatians 1:18, where Jesus or Paul goes and meets the brother Christ, his closest disciple, and he wouldn't give an inch. And I gotta agree with you, atheists can be very fundamental.
Very fundamental, very dogmatic.
Eric, and then TJ. Eric?
So, given that you're not an atheist, you're unconvinced that the atheist position is true. Why?
If you're going to say that atheism is a position that there are no gods, I'm not convinced. I don't hold the belief there are no gods. Right. Now, that would obviously be agnosticism, right? Because I'm suspending judgment on either proposition, the proposition that God exists, or the proposition that God does not exist. So, in a nutshell, I don't think I'm justified to say I believe there are no gods. If there's an atheist that says I believe there are no gods and they're justified to do it, more power to them. My question to them is, okay, simply what is your justification? And I think you can be justified. I think I could justify being an atheist if I wanted to be. The way an atheist would go about justifying their position, to me, a simple way of doing it would be this. Here's the reason why I'm an atheist. I'm going to take an aggregate of these arguments. Divine hiddenness, more epistemological arguments against God,
Moral monster.
The moral monster. These are all arguments, now granted, they're not all global, right? Logical problem evil, evidential problem evil. But an atheist can say, look, I'm taking an aggregate of all these arguments, and I think it is, like a Dawkins would say, even though I hate probabilities, it is probably the case there are no gods. I'm going to hold the belief that there are no gods. Now, I don't think we choose our beliefs. I do tend to Dawkins involuntarism, where
indirect agnostic voluntarism?
So involuntarilist would be somebody who your brain gives you a belief.
Yeah, but you hold to the indirect, right? Not the direct.
Indirect, yeah, indirect. I don't think we can will ourselves to believe something.
Right.
There are ways we can will ourselves to be maybe like delude ourselves, self-deluded. But if I say I want to believe I can fly, I cannot sit here no matter how much I try and do that. I think our brains do all the work, the heavy lifting, and then we recognize it after the fact.
That could be engineered from externally. Like if you went to a prison camp, an education camp, and like brainwashing.
Yeah, oh sure.
You could be forced into
that, but that's externalized. Internalized, I don't think I don't see how I can actually force myself to believe something, right?
You can desire to, but you can't force it. You're gonna have to put yourself in a position.
Right.
Before we go to TJ,
but see how an atheist can do that? See how an atheist can actually look, I'm an atheist because I think with all these arguments,
and that's what I'm asking you, because like let's
fine with that
let's look at like politics. Let's say you have this party and this party. If I say I'm not gonna vote for you, why not? Because I'm not convinced of your policies. And when the other person asks me that, I'm going to say the same thing, which means I'm unconvinced from both parties. So what makes atheism unconvincing to
Okay,
you?
well, two things. One, another good argument, by the way, I was going to tell you before is, like, when somebody says, I don't believe there are gods because all gods sound like they're like superhero kind of things. Every property we've ever known about God has been told to us. We've never discovered any property of God's. Just like Superman or Spider-Man, those things have been told to us by people. They have these properties. Superman can fly, Spider-Man can do this. That's a good argument, right? If a person wants to use that as a justificatory condition to say, look, if I look at God and I look at like superhero, and I'm not trying to say that God is, you know, a superhero kind of thing, but I mean the properties of these things of being like a deity, as opposed to what we believe would be a very fantastic superhero, are very similar. And anything to make a justification for that, I got no problem with that.
I'm wondering what God they're thinking of, but go on.
Well, I mean, God is pretty powerful, right? I mean, he's all powerful, and superheroes are pretty
Or the
powerful.
maximally great being.
Maximally great being properties.
Yeah.
And that was the other thing. I lost the other thing I was going to tell you.
The case of, well, he's asking, you know, why, what positive reason you have for not believing atheism?
Well, I mean, we all have personal experiences, right? And I know a lot of people discount subjective personal experiences, but there are things that I've had in my life that I can't explain materialistically. I mean, they might have a materialistic approach, but I don't discount the possibility of some being, because...
Would it be too private to share one of them?
Yeah, I'm not gonna get into that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not about private, it's a different topic altogether, probably. But, I think that when you say, though, I hate this, when somebody says, I don't believe because I'm not convinced, that is a vacuous statement to me. It serves no informational content, because it is derivable if I say I do not believe that you are not convinced. It is literally derivable using logic to say, well, if you don't believe, you clearly aren't convinced, because if you were convinced, you would believe.
You're just restating the same
So you're
thing.
restating the
It's a
same thing that's not
tautology.
informative. It's a tautology in that way, because I'm not giving you any information why I don't believe. To say that I don't believe because I'm not convinced is vacuous.
And that's what I'm asking, why
Which is
are you
one of the
not
other things I've
persuaded
argued
then?
that people give me flack on, but it is vacuous.
Why are you
What's
not
your
persuaded?
best argument for not believing in atheism?
Yeah.
Well, again, there's only so many amount of things why we exist, right? There's only a certain amount of things. We go back to the whole infinite regress, contingent, metaphysical necessity. And I would, if I was to argue from a theist position, if there's a metaphysical necessity, then yeah, maybe God would make sense, right? Because there's only so many different possibilities as a what makes something a metaphysical necessity? It must exist in all possible worlds. What exists in all possible worlds that could act as an explanatory thing for the universe? Well, some kind of God, some kind of being that makes it all
Maximally
happen.
good being.
And we as humans, we have seen intelligence. We've seen people create. So could there be a creator being that has done all this? Yeah, we can draw an abductive argument from that. And then people can argue, well, okay, let's argue with that. This person says, yeah, that's a good argument. This one says it's a bad argument. So as a theist, I would probably argue, if I was to go that route, that yes, here's a metaphysical necessity that exists. I'm going to argue it's God, and then try to give you my reasons why I think it's God.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean,
Because you would accept God as a metaphysical necessity, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what was your
Oh,
point?
it's back.
Okay.
Before we go to
Okay.
TJ though,
Okay.
real quickly, okay, as an agnostic, if God did exist, would you want to know God existed, or
Oh, yeah.
or would you rather not know?
No, I like to know things. I'm not a skeptic.
Okay,
That's
have you
the word.
ever attempted to make contact as an agnostic where you are right now?
Oh, well, I mean, back in the day when
No,
I was
no, I mean
kids.
now.
Oh, no, because I don't think it would do any good, because I've already been there, done that. Yeah, I accept divine hiddenness argument to some degree, because if God wants to have a personal communication with me, okay, go for it. That would be his choice.
But that's all I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Would you say, God, I don't believe in you at this point, I don't have enough data, whatever. But if you are out there, I would ask you to review.
Well, I think every atheist has done that at one point, probably. Well, a lot of atheists have done that at one point, and they don't get answers.
Well, the reason I'm asking, I've talked to some
Yeah, I've done that
agnostics who
before.
said to me,
Yeah, sure.
you know, if God did exist,
Go
no,
for it.
I don't want to know.
I don't know why you would not want to know.
Well, like Matt Dillahunty, when you talk to him, he goes, I wouldn't
Dillahunty.
worship Jesus if he...
Well, that's a different
Well,
question. That's a different
It's
question,
a
right?
different question. But,
No,
you know,
he probably wouldn't worship God either.
You know, but no, I like knowledge. I mean, we like. I think everybody.
Well, how about
books.
if
I think most
Why would you read a book if you didn't want to learn from it,
most
right?
agnostics I've talked to are what I would call open-minded agnostics.
Yeah, that's
If
virtue
there
epistemology.
was a God, I think they would want to know that. So that's
Yeah.
why I make
But
contact.
you have
if you
found
ever
some
attempt to
that
make contact.
aren't
But,
open.
Yeah,
but
well,
I have had the close.
I got I gotta tell you, when I hear an atheist say, well, I would want to know if God exists, but if God existed, I would just like, I would not worship, I would like tell him to, go to hell or whatever. And I'm like, look, dude, if you had this maximally great being right in front of you, and that, you would be scared out of your mind. Let's be realistic here. Because I know I would be, right? And
well, Jim would agree with you, but Matt Delahunt didn't agree with you.
Right? I mean, because
Aaron Rod definitely doesn't agree with you.
Well, here's the thing. Look, if you had the choice, between, and by the way, I've never believed in an eternal hell fire, never. Okay, but if you had the choice theoretically between eternal hell and just praising a God, it would be irrational to me to say, oh, I'm going to choose the hell. It would make no sense. Now, could people do it? Could people be irrational? Sure, but I mean, I would rather, say, okay, I praise you, whatever, and be saved. But I don't think that God actually gives people that choice. Yeah, I don't think God. To me, it's a whole Pascal.
TJ had something.
If we don't have God telling us
I
this,
had something else, but I really want to correct what you just said so bad.
Me or him?
Go ahead,
What you
TJ.
said, because no, it's not like we're just saying to hell with you, we're not going to worship you. It's okay. We're saying that if we're presented with this deity, the one that's described in the Bible, Yahweh, the monster that we read about. That's the one we won't worship. Yeah, I'll kiss his ass, but he'll know that I don't really worship that.
And that's a good point. By the way, he would know your heart whether you really believe, or not.
What could a perfect being do besides care for me because I'm just the way I am?
Well, and that's a good point, because God's going to know
even
whether you're faking it or not, right?
Even if I hated him, even if I said
so you're kind of SOL regardless. You're going to go to hell. You're going to go to hell.
Yeah,
We're all Calvinists now.
Yay, Calvinists!
Wouldn't a perfect being have to respect that that's the way I turned out?
Well, I think in the Dawkins interview we saw when he was asked, well, do you believe in Yahweh of the Bible? And Richard Dawkins tells Ben Stein, no, that would be a very unpleasant being.
Yeah,
I'm thinking that maybe Yahweh thinks the same of Richard Dawkins.
But there are I think that different Christians posit a different type of deities. For the Yahweh. I mean, not all of them think God's a moral monster. Right. But I do accept, like Eric was, when I was talking to Eric, I think that most Christians probably do accept that God is a metaphysical necessity that must exist in all possible worlds. And that, I think, is a good argument for a theist to take. Yeah, I think that if they're going to posit a deity, they should posit it as a metaphysical necessity.
Well, and not only the God of the Old Testament is capricious and just flies off the handle, just kill the women, the children, just don't spare anybody.
In the Bible is very good.
Well, and the God of the New Testament, Jesus Christ, goes and just off the handle, goes to get some figs and says, oh, and it's not even the season, and he just curses the tree. Who wants to worship a capricious God? And one reason we know Jesus exists, Matthew, this was in Mark, Matthew finds it so problematic, he omits it was in season. So he finds it, good Lord, this guy's crazy. I'm gonna just say, oh, he cursed the fig tree, forget the season.
If it's possible, and somebody said, look, I'm gonna give you an hour alone with Jesus or God, you can ask any question you want, who's gonna give that up?
Oh, yeah,
right?
Of course, yeah.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, but at that point, if you accept that, if you say, you know what, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to have a conversation with God, you cannot be an atheist at that point. Because you would believe that, or you have a contradiction, obviously. You could say, well, I don't believe God exists, but I'm talking to God. It's kind of irrational, right? And you can have irrational beliefs. But if you say, you know what, I believe there's a God now, that doesn't, you're a theist, but doesn't mean you have to worship God.
But you can't say you knew God existed before. You can only say it.
But if you're having a conversation with God, if God came down right now, it would be a theist, right? Because unless they for some reason they're trying to say, well, this isn't really a deity. But here's my argument on that: if you had an all-powerful deity, I think that you would probably know something. I mean, it'd be really hard to say, well.
Well, how about if God's like a badass in the Old Testament, where he is the vengeful, malicious thing, Richard Dawkins thing, misogynistic, infanticide, or whatever.
Yeah.
Would you worship him just because he's sovereign? You're not.
Save him from hell. You're damn right.
Well, there you go.
I'm not an idiot. But here's the question:
you are logical.
I would have issues with it myself. But I'd be like, okay, God, explain to me why you like this.
If he could, yes.
He might just say, hey, you know what? I'm just a real, POS. So I mean, who knows? He might admit to it. You don't know.
Let me just wrap up. I want to give Ken the last word, but before we do, the Christian concept, I think most monotheists would say that look at God as being a maximally good being, And so whatever he does is going to be morally right. And this goes back to our inability to understand morality. And so if you look at the history of humanity, everything we believe right now to be moral, mostly as a culture, was considered immoral 100 years ago.
Yeah, but I think
so it's a moving target. So give us another 100 years and see where we are morally.
The problem I have with that, I find that it's a crippling effect. When you have to basically defer your morals to some other being, and you haven't developed your own moral ontology and own moral beliefs, it has a crippling effect, because you're basically saying, you know what, I haven't really sat around and thought about what's ethical. I'm just going to defer whatever this dude says, whatever God says to be the case, that has to be it.
I wouldn't say it was deferring as much as realizing the limits of my ability. You know, when I discovered that God may not love the Dallas Cowboys, it was a very crippling. But a lot of things I believe morally is because I live in Texas in the early part of the 21st century. And if I lived in a different part of the world at a different time, I might have a whole different moral structure.
Well,
if I lived 200 years ago, you know, let's take any issue, gay marriage. Where do we stand on that?
Yeah, well,
give me the
that's
calendar
cultural
and I'll tell you where we
relativism.
stand.
We figured out it was immoral to own people's
I'm not a
property.
big fan of absolutism, right? I'm not a big fan of it. But I do, when somebody says, like, this is always going to be the case, it's wrong.
Yeah.
Well, again, an absolute kind of two different things. But I don't have a problem with saying, look, this is, like, slavery to me is always wrong. It's always wrong, okay? But I'm not an absolutist. I don't want to sit there and have the positions to say, well, there are moral facts that are just always wrong. But I do hold that certain things, I don't think you could ever justify something like slavery. It's non-justifiable, in my view of ethics. But ethics are messy. I mean,
I would have never thought we would come to a day in which plastic straws was immorality.
Yeah, that's a little.
Where are we going to be 100 years from now?
Are totally divorced from reality,
Right.
and jumping the shark all the time now, though, man. I mean, you see stuff like that, and you can't. Normal people don't look at something like that and think those people are in their right mind, because it's so far outside of any norm that we've established.
They
in our
say the same
society.
thing about you.
Here.
No.
Yeah, they would.
About what aspect of me?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what they would say. They'd say,
That's what I'm
you
saying.
know,
I'm taking it. No,
In
because I'm
some,
taking a
look, in
specific
some cultures,
thing
you
that
can't show
someone is
ankle,
pointing
right?
to.
Ankle would be immoral, right? So I accept there is what's called descriptive moral relativism. I think that there are cultural things that are different between cultures that they would call morality. But I do think there's some fundamental things that applies to all society to some degrees, or at least the possibility that certain things, like for example, don't kill all your kids. That's ubiquitous.
Can we at least agree of this, of where our culture is today? Let's say we're right now, or righter now than we used to be 200, 400, 500 years ago.
I think morality is
Then
a thing. I think
500 years from now,
we're
we're going to be looked at as moral Neanderthals, of how blind we are. And if we don't recognize our own blindness when you look at historical morality, I think we're missing a big point.
Well, if there are moral facts, then you can argue whether they're discoverable or not.
Right.
True.
Yes.
That's
So
what
as we grow and we learn, if there are moral facts and we have access to them.
Assuming that we're always progressing and not regressing, and that's another begging the question there. Are our morality actually getting worse now in some areas? That's another book club.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we come to the end of another lovely Friday night. I have Ken's last word, and then we're going to close out.
So I wanted to register my agreement with what you said about Dawkins' conclusion that God couldn't exist, or the Old Testament God couldn't exist because that would be unpleasant, right? That's a logical fallacy called argument from consequences.
Yeah.
So you don't like consequences,
Yeah.
so you make an argument.
There's nothing illogical by saying God can't exist in that case. It's
Right.
an
Might
evil
be something
deed.
we don't like.
Right.
But I think the same holds true for, oftentimes Christians will say, well, you can't justify your moral grounding or ethics or whatever. Well, even if that's the case, that may be something we don't like, that we can't ground our morals objectively or absolutely. But that doesn't mean that atheism or naturalism is incoherent.
Yeah, you can take moral
True.
subjectivism, and that's fine.
And as a reminder, next month we are going to be dealing with atheist overreach. It's not our focus chapter. Our focus chapter is chapter 3. However, earlier in the book, he makes on discovering morality on these issues. He makes a strong case that being an atheist doesn't mean that you're immoral. That it doesn't mean that your morality can't be grounded. He leans over backwards to, I think, try to be real fair, and I think you're going to appreciate this. So I want to encourage you to read the book, have your questions for Dr. Smith, and we will ask that for the book club, and then we'll watch the video with his answers, and that's going to be February 7th. I want to say thank you, first of all, to Steve so much for being here, man.
So
really
much
appreciate it.
I'm honored.
Jim Hall and TJ and Atheist Edge, for those folks helping to make your visit here possible with us, for our other guests, for Ashley, for the other Steve, for Jim Majors. Where did he go?
I think he bounced.
Okay. I want to thank all the. How many people are here for the first time? This is the first club. Thank you so much for being here, for being part of the club, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you.